Take for lunch. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. I use it every year.
Wait, is that Rasa?
Yeah. This is Rasa? Yes.
Rasa.
I'll sit
a little closer. Looking good.
So, starting.
Good morning, for a sec.
Hello. Everyone sits on rows, like school.
Is this school?
It's school. Yeah, that's a problem actually. No, that's a school. Like, is it for instruction or is it for studying? There's a difference between studying and instructing or learning.
Which do you think?
And you study and you don't learn anymore. You study. You should learn how to study and not learn. Because learning doesn't make sense with not when you have all knowledge instantly accessible, doesn't make sense anymore to learn. But what do you learn? Huh? Like when you have all knowledge, you have to learn how to study, how to research, how to get your interest, how to get motion your interest. That's the university. You are somehow raising a question for your future, not even a solution. You have to raise a question. Sorry for this.
That's a great way to start out.
Yeah. Sorry for that. Because I'm always like, when this furniture is so heavy always.
The furniture is
It's like
scripted.
This is also a way.
You can rotate that slightly just to exercise command of space and to face the screen. Please do. Move your desk. Be in command of the design. That's all you need. Agency.
And you see also how heavy the furniture is, so it's it's so great to see models.
Nice to be back.
Yes.
I think we have 2 more people.
Wait,
Wait, why not just look at it?
You're okay, because you're like right here, but if you're in the ends, I think I always felt like nobody's over there.
You play Fortnite or lights off?
Why are you laughing?
You were happy. Oh, yeah.
Well, should we start, or
But
should we wait a minute?
We have to get some more stuff.
We're gonna,
How many do we have? How many of these?
we have 8 left.
I think it's all digital.
Yeah, so we have about 30 minutes. We have 1:30, 5:30, right?
Yeah, well, it is Friday afternoon, some of us may be on the lower.
So like 25
Productive, you know,
20 minutes per project?
Yeah, 5 minutes presentation.
Is it last class? Okay, sorry it's cold, so I was kind of running a little late, sweaty. I'm here now, you're good. Everything is settled. How you doing?
Doing well?
Good, good.
So, anyone know Australia, Ivanovic?
Who else is
Anyone
supposed
seen
to
it?
be here? Anyone?
That's it. That's Snolia. Is that your surname?
I saw her, but, well,
Sometimes they don't show up.
we could just do small talk until then, if anybody know how to.
We can wait till
Yeah.
1:40, maybe? Huh?
I don't know.
Yes, how's the weather?
I don't know if we've met, I'm John Blood.
I have you. He's in the name somewhere.
Heard of me.
Yeah, hey, you're bloody.
Bloody Blood is a nickname of mine, but it's okay.
How you doing?
No, but it's good to be here. You're Mr. Coco?
Yeah.
Yeah, what's your name?
Yeah. Yes.
Pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, likewise.
I think we share the space in the studio at Sutton Hall.
Yeah.
I'm the kind of messy group on the other half of that horribly loud room,
Right,
that you
right,
can't hear
right,
anything.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a nice space. I don't know.
It's spatially, it's nice, and the windows are nice, but the
Yeah, it gets hot,
sound
though.
is very weird, and the sound bounces around, and I can't hear anything. So I haven't heard anything any of my students are saying. Yeah, whatever.
Hearing is okay.
You're, where are you from? You're an emerging scholar?
Yeah, more time to this.
Scholar, or like,
No, I'm in USC, I come to USC. I'm not scared. It's exciting, but I'm coming to Texas, such a like visiting
Yeah.
faculty or something. Stay there and go to the East Coast. You know, just stay there.
that might be cool, you know.
You're a teaching student, too, aren't you? You're a teaching student as well. Aren't you?
Yes, design 6.
And that's like, that one advanced studio, or that's before the advanced studio?
The last one before the advanced studios is design. It looked to integrate structure and mechanical systems and the whole picture.
Oh, I see. It's like comprehensive studio?
A composite, that kind of stuff.
Cool. Yeah, I can start teaching that.
Actually,
Yeah,
right.
it's a good. I might go into that. I don't think any fail has got that math yet, and we have to, I might be who teaches that class, but I'm considering it, maybe.
Let's go ahead and get started, I guess. So quick introduction for all the reviewers. This is Kenny Coco. He's also teaching second year housing studio and the emerging scholar, and his work kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, it kind of blends art and architecture, and he has some background in landscape as well. So he's very valuable for the studio. And then John Blood, who many of you know, is architect and
Some of you I know, but fine.
Architect, but also your work kind of focuses on fictions as well, in terms of like film and
Filmmaking, yeah.
Mhm.
Design for film.
Suhash Patel teaches here, and then also is a project designer at Road Partners. And you all know Daniel, or not, maybe you don't know Daniel, never mind. Daniel also focuses in his work on computational design and kind of looking at how we can create new types of urban typologies and spaces through that. And then Sonia Milovanovic, her work focuses on the conditions and effects of the physical and metaphysical dislocation on spatial imagination. I got that online. She also is a professor here and leads the Italy program. So to give a quick background on the studio, so the second year studios was all focused on this idea of urban ecology, and so me and Rasa kind of brainstormed at the beginning of the semester what we thought that meant to us, and we thought that we wanted to look at how we could take kind of these natural voids that are existing in kind of urban space and then begin to bring that into a typical building typology. So here on the right, you see kind of more of a communal void in the Space Block Hanoi project, and then sometimes these voids will show up as landscape as well, as we see on the left. And so beginning to integrate this idea of all these ecologies into kind of one larger urban scheme. And so all the second year studios had kind of a breakdown that was, we focused on a case study and then looked at site, and then from there they would develop a housing unit or some type of unit, public, private, and then from there they would aggregate those and create some building proposal. Our transect, and so most of the students have different sites, and they were allowed to kind of explore and choose their own sites along this sort of transect within East Austin. We, in particular, had East 7th. So if you see all the way on the west side here is I-35, and then we could choose sites along this transect all the way down to Springdale here. And so if you look at this kind of the condition of East Austin, we can see kind of this idea of urban ecology being challenged here already in terms of looking to the north side. We see this more residential area, which is covered and shaded by trees and has plenty of landscape. And then to the south of East 7th, we have a much different condition where current densities are happening, and we're beginning to lose that landscape. So we wanted to really challenge the students in the studio to begin to integrate that sort of landscape condition we see here into a denser condition. And so as groups, the students went through and did different types of site analysis, looking at where these natural voids were happening, and where humans had access versus not having access within East Austin. And then they would also model these case studies, look at, okay, how do we introduce these voids into a typical housing unit or apartment? And so these are different studies from the students. And then we also began to introduce them to Unity, which is a 3D software which has essentially looks at these kind of different building parts and begins to move them and kind of it uses a script to kind of see how these relationships happen, so we can consider these parts as public or private, and then using the 3D script, we can begin to understand how those spaces interact. So the students did a little bit of studying within that and some sort of research by design through that. And it was more, I would say it was more of a jumping off point for them. And kind of in the second half of the semester, we really wanted to focus on how do we take those sorts of ideas from digital, kind of, this digital process and this computational process and begin to translate it to a new type of building. So this quote here by Mario Carpo kind of begins to look at that. He talks about not designing a building using digital tools, but rather designing a building that could not have been designed or built without them. So beginning to look at, how do we consider these kind of building parts as almost like the different letters in an alphabet, and then essentially thinking about how these different letters or building parts begin to combine, create ultimate unlimited amount of variation and new types of housing technologies. So we can begin to see that here in some of the students' work, where they begin to design these building parts, and then later their studies would then aggregate to create new types of housing that begin to introduce these natural voids and landscape. And then these studies would later go on to develop into a more realized building project. So yeah, that's it. Great.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Faith Bryant, and I'll be presenting my take on this studio of urban ecologies. The 3 main concepts that I had in mind while designing this housing complex were affordability, diversity, and environment. And I kept those in mind throughout this whole process. I'll get a little bit more into the site in the next few slides. This is just a rendering of it sitting on a Google image. So we did some neighborhood analysis, and this is kind of showing the different areas of private versus public space, and the blue is showing private space, and the green is showing public space. We have a park up here with a creek running that way, and then there's HB down here. But most of this is quite private, but it kind of mixes. And so the site I chose, I wanted to set my building in a place that would kind of combine those two and like sit right on the axis of the private and public spaces. And here's a program diversity map, kind of just showing the difference between the residential more on the north side and more commercial on the south side of East 7th. And this is East 7th right here. And the site I chose is on the corner of Northwestern Avenue and Coronado Street right here. And I chose this site because it has good pedestrian access, vehicle access. It's right near a commuter rail, and it's right across the street from the HEB, so they've got good access to things that they need. And it again connects that public sphere with the private sphere. Here is my site plan, kind of showing the layout of that overall building sitting on the site that I chose. This is right here, a green wall, kind of just to separate it from these buildings down here. And I aligned it so that it was parallel with the street rather than keeping it north-south. So I started out my mid-review. I had 10 different units, and they were all various shapes and sizes. They weren't modular, and it kind of fit together, but there were some overhangs and edges. So after that, I went back in and made some more modular units that fit better together when it came to stacking them and putting them next to each other. So each of these is a 40-foot by 40-foot square with 20 feet by 20 feet blocks taken out of them in various ways. And there are studios. These first 2 are both studios. And that third unit is a 1-bedroom. I have 9 different unit types, and they're all repeated several times, but the interiors are unique to the own unit based on where it's located in the mass and how the windows are facing and where the doors are located based on its placement. And I have a variety of studios, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and I do have a couple 3 bedroom for some larger families. And that's how I plan to accommodate diversity and affordability. With some smaller units, you have the lower square footage, so you can afford that better. But also with bigger units, you have a more diverse population that can live in these spaces, from a single person to a family of 3 or 4 people. So this is just all that I have up there, if y'all want to take a look at that. That is just downstairs of one of the units I have. So this is my ground floor plan. And Northwestern Avenue is on that right side, and Coronado Street is up on the top. There are 3 main access points to this complex. Is right here. I guess that's 4 actually. Down here on the bottom, the top, and then on both sides. And it's a courtyard, central green space area. I tried to incorporate as much green space as possible. This is just a section of the build on that side. And the units are placed with the modular dimensions. They were easy to kind of place like Tetris pieces. And then down here, I have my elevators and main circulation core, and it goes up to each floor. And the different units are kind of just spread out on each floor. And this is my 3rd level, kind of just showing like the different green spaces and access. Every single unit does have access to green space. Some of it is private and some of it is more shared and public. But every unit does have green access. And this is my 4th floor, which just shows kind of how there's less units going up and up, so it gets just smaller as it gets to the top. I only have 5 floors. I didn't want to make my building too tall to take away the view of the residential homes that it's near. And I didn't want a big giant skyscraper in the building, kind of just something mild and that didn't like take over the scene. And this is my unit shot. So this just shows like 3 units all together with some green space in there. 3 different types with some windows in there. And this shows the differences in the studio, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, and then the public area with circulation. This is kind of just a massing study showing the different types of units and all the people that it can accommodate. And then I did have some material precedents. My renderings do need some improvement, but I was focusing on this green wall. I have a green wall in there that's facing a building, and it's on the circulation core, so it covers almost the entire facade of the building. And then I really like the idea of the wood as a main material. And for privacy, you don't want someone always being able to look into your home, so I just like the idea of the reflective glass. And this is a axon. The materials are a bit iffy, but the main idea is having the wood and the green space there, and then some pathways between circulation. There's exterior stairs as well between each floor and the units. I placed all my green space on the roofs of the units, on each of them all the way up to the top floor, to maximize the amount of accessible and non-accessible green space, to incorporate that concept of environment into my project. This is that model over there. And then this is my first section, kind of just showing like the difference in height in each space. Like here's a double height space for public access, and then there's part of the courtyard. There's multiple different levels of public access on each floor, bigger spaces where you can gather, cafe areas, there's like public laundry spaces, exercising, that type of thing on each floor. And then my next section cut in the opposite direction. Again, kind of showing like that courtyard on the bottom and like just the different levels and things like that. And then here are to experiential. That still need work, but, okay.
Thank you. Is there a site plan?
Yes. It's missing the trees, but I kind of placed them here. There's trees along right here, and then I would plant some.
Are there sidewalks in the public thoroughfare?
Yes, I believe that's what these are.
And adjacent to your site, are there sidewalks?
Oh, yes, there should be.
So the model is just half of the project.
Yeah, this is just a chunk of that.
And then, is it, how it looks in 3D, or is it like maybe like middle then? So this kind of terracing goes up again? Or?
Yes, so in the middle, there's kind of a courtyard that goes all the way to the bottom, and then it kind of like builds up on the outside. Yeah. Yes, I'll do the. So it kind of.
How many total units?
27.
Is there parking as part of the program?
No.
Okay. Can you go to a lower floor plan and explain how one enters the space and finds your way around?
Yes. Okay. So there's public access right in from the top and bottom and left and right sides, and there's pathways that have that are accessible to all of the doors to the units and to the elevator and circulation bays. So honestly, you just follow the pathways and you'll get to a building or doorway. And then they also lead you to stairways. But like here's a one bedroom, I think, or two bedroom, goes upstairs on top of that. But each unit has access on that path.
You go up the level, please. Next level up. Parking off in the elevator corridor, we fill to the bottom of here. Cost. This is the green is open to below, or
yes,
the
so
gray up to okay.
The green is the uppermost level of green that's accessible to this floor. The hatched is what's below. That's visible, so.
So that's open. That's this area right here is.
That's on the ground floor. So I cut.
You have a section like.
Oh, no, I don't.
You don't know occupied space.
I do not.
Can you work to your slide plans?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the. You go, just go to the first floor plan.
There you go.
Okay, so it'd be nice if you had kind of show the intersections of the streets on the ground floor plan. Yeah, so you can see the streets and how they kind of wrap around your the project. I mean, it helps us kind of evaluate the project. I think a lot of the success on a project like this has to do with the relationship with the ground. So,
Right.
so I mean, it seems as though, I don't know how much kind of value you gave that, how much of it criteria that played into the project, but whether or not it was an assigned criteria to sort of think about that relationship, it's one you have to sort of bring to your project. Because you could have a project that's otherwise successful and really kind of clever in the way you sort of aggregate and make connections between units, creating public spaces, outdoors, all those things. But the success is going to be based on how good this thing hits the floor, especially in an urban context like we are here. It's a city,
Yeah.
so you have like fairly long walls on the sidewalk. So imagine one way to kind of help is like think about things like imagine yourself walking down the sidewalk. Right? You want something pleasant, don't you? I mean, you want to see like people drinking coffee or whatever, a bakery, a cafe. You want to see life on the ground. Except you don't like that. But you don't want to see like a long 20-foot wall and opening, and then another wall and glazing. Right? So there are ways you could either draw those things to, like, populate it with life, maybe add some trees, create some vitality on the interior of the courtyard, but definitely on the exterior, the sort of threshold between your project and the street and the sidewalk, right? You should not have walls that long.
Okay.
Right? Either put openings there, and it's easy to just allocate. You know, you can just say cafe.
Yeah.
Glaze it. That's all. It's as you're sort of acknowledging the existence of your project being in the city, and not something that is kind of insular or sort of totally acontextual and autonomous. So even that consideration of the ground plane begin to inform the way the aggregations actually form them and maybe build up. So it becomes a more enriched project when you give consideration to. And I know many of you are like architects and sort of frames like I have to do a building, but a building at the scale is not successful unless it deals with a ground plane, except you propose a new ground plane, right? Which I think will require considerable amount of effort, right? And then you're like, well, I'm elevating that's like the new public square is like actually above ground. Then you could sort of, maybe there's a way to sort of dismiss kind of regard of kind of, plane of the city.
So there's I agree completely. There's a perpetual struggle with housing between you're not wanting to do large, long, blank walls along the public sidewalk or thoroughfare, but also providing windows and openings that are private for the inside.
Right.
So those are two things that are struggling with each other perpetually. It's actually the kind of thing that can be resolved at the very small scale. It's not something that fits into maybe the list of requirements that you've been given or the operations that you've been asked to do with Unity, et cetera. Or maybe you could re-script it as a way to do it. But it's really like a cross-section through the wall, like if I just do a cross-section where the two screens come together there, private unit bedroom to new green space to sidewalk to street. So sidewalk to street is a 6-inch separation, and little micro adjustments in height so that maybe you're inside, you look out a window and you look over people's heads. People on the sidewalk don't look into your unit. And little details in terms of margin and threshold can have quite a powerful effect. And those are the things that might, I think, it's the thing that's not in the drawings, but might actually be in the drawings to start to test these in a very important way. And again, I would just love to see this in a conventional floor plan convention with door swings and windows and furniture, so I can start to imagine what each of the spaces are like, to start to see if there is a network of sorry, I'll end the sentence there and go to a new thought, excuse me. I could imagine with this ratio of open space, a flexible new definition of how that might be arranged and oriented, that each space inside each unit could have its own private green space outside. I don't know if I heard you say that or not, but I'm looking at this thing with its new arrangement. I think that there is an opportunity where that might begin to happen. And I'd love to be able to read the drawings in a way where I can imagine how that could begin to work. And again, look for those places that are struggles where you don't quite begin to see it. One thing that I would definitely in this include the dash line that shows where there's a bridge or something above, because I know how to read that. I know that means that there's either open sky or something connected up above. And I would be very cautious of using a walkway that's just a 3-foot strip. I'll just say never do that. Okay, so maybe it's something that's a linear connection, but is it halfway between those two walls? Maybe it's up against the blank wall, so the spaces below that have more generous space in front of them, so they begin to have their private space, and that's part of the codification of how these buildings are. Oh, sorry, those are the core units. Maybe it's the other way around then. So that it's part of the codification about how each unit is a module, but next to that is this new kind of green space, either vertically or
Yeah, I think the comments are on point. Like, you need to draw what's around you too. It's not the building itself. Like architecture will look at buildings, see how it sits in the ground, how it relates to your context. So the comment about the plan, I think it's in all your drawings. Even in a section, you want to see what's the height of the building next to it. And it's at this, like, for the next steps, it's like really when you get your drawing, really draw it. It's not just cut plain from Rhino and Crochet and let's call it a day. Like, now make it, like, add stuff to it that tells the story a little bit better. What's the private garden versus what's the public space,
Okay.
And then when you're doing Unity and a lot of the computational stuff, this is, I think, the beginning of an output, but you are in control where you can move sidewalk, where you can make sidewalks bigger, you can add aperture because it was not in your initial input. Then we look at it, all right, I need to add aperture to this bedroom, and you just imagine living in a bedroom that doesn't have a window. If it's not in the input from the beginning, then you come and make the decision as a designer. The computer will just do what you tell it to do, it's not gonna design it for you.
Right.
So get a little bit more control over the computer.
Yeah, now there's a stage of this that should actually be a lot of fun, where you just print it out, you get some good piece of trace over, you start drawing furniture and people using it, and start to imagine what's it like to be in here and kind of play around with it, and then you'll discover things like, oh crap, maybe there should be a window here or some kind of exception. And then having worked your way across here again, of getting your imagination into each of the little nooks and crannies, in the back of your head, you're going like, oh, you know, I could rewrite that script just a little bit so I can get this like maximum feedback into the operational set of rules that the thing that generates some space and relationships to start with. And there could be some kind of really brilliant output from that.
It's a very fascinating system and method by which you have generated a series of different conditions on macro and micro scale, small and large, and that gave you all these habitational possibilities. So what would be really interesting for you to see, because this provided a really rich set of relationships that can be examined on the level of the unit itself, or the space, and its space connection to the outside. And then as you aggregate, and you have a space here that's looking up to the green, and then if you just continue on, you can see what the space next to it. So in generating all these incredible spatial possibilities, what can be a test for you is to figure out how you can talk about this project in terms of phenomenology and occupation. Like, for example, if I aggregate these units this way, what kind of series of spaces do I open for an inhabitant from inside to go outside and to move to the next, to go up or to go down, so that you, like a filmmaker, you occupy space and you begin to move through, and then you can have a narrative about what your story is about, as opposed to we're looking at formal relationships, which I think is very rich, you've got a lot of possibilities, but for you to test it for yourself is to actually have a narrative of how you experience all of this. I go from closed, I come to open, I descend, I look up, I go up, come up, I descend down, because this is what I see. So if you can test this incredible form generative system against what your ideas are about how you're going to actually occupy and use. So that's how we're looking to and housing in particular, there's sort of three different scales that you can think about the occupation of the scale of the unit. We have the inner life of the family person, whoever is the occupant, and then you have that person's relationship to the neighbor. And so you have an internal story in here of how do all of these people get along. Then, so that's the second, the life within a unit, life on the floor, and then the life of this object within a city. Where is the street? Where is the tree? How do I get to that? So if you can get your mind to be like a film director, you can really occupy and move through all of this, then you can appreciate the fruits of your labor by giving it phenomenological description. Is that making sense?
Yes.
So that's how I would actually construct it, because what's interesting about this way of thinking about architecture is that it is actually taken a construct from a program that you've manipulated and have given you a set of all these possibilities, as opposed to, let's say, maybe in another section that have been done by having a film narrative of what they want this unit to be like, and then they have to find the forms to house the activities inside, relationship to the neighbor, and then relationship to the city. So to just be aware of the thinking, and as you have, as things are given to you, that you find a meaning in them. Okay, so I think this is a wonderful way to think about architecture, not like how will I make this room, but like this room was found by the processes that I've done. Now I need to understand the meaning of that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Only very short. I think the plans for final presentation are by far too abstract. I would really like to prove them for the portfolio. And this only the abstraction actually rescues your project. You're telling the game that this all units are housing, which is nonsense. So it doesn't work at all. I mean, it's nice that you, for example, I see that you have it's very articulated that, for example, windows never face each other, so there's a kind of we look into privacy. But actually, the potential of that project is that those are not housing units. And you see like this in the middle, like for kind of consultation, like a medic or physiotherapy or whatever kind of practice, like this would actually be social. I mean, why people should actually live in some dense area? Because there are some other programs, but from what you benefit. So this is when you look also to like just north and around, like mid-size housing projects. So they have not only the pool to it, but also some maker space, shared offices, and so on, for it. Or simply this in the middle could be also like a guest house, which you can on short-term rentals as one of those owners, you can rent a space. And then actually this kind of like you should also learn to integrate form diversity in programmatic diversity. Begin with your final, not pre-assume like a program, but a way now fill that in a different way. Because ordinary living wouldn't make sense. So,
And it's what Daniel's saying is important, but it's not difficult to do. You actually already have the structure for it, right? But it's just just going back and like maybe erasing some walls, like something as easy as assigning a program. I mean, you don't have to populate it. So in my class, I'm like, well, this is a lot to do, so let's just diagramize, just put a plan, just write the text of what the ground might be doing, and that way you could sort of begin to think holistically about sort of inputs or implications that play into the project, and how it sort of operates on the scale of the city to kind of the scale of each sort of unit. So you have a kind of sort of back and forth between these two sort of dimensions, and even just thinking about that I guess informs how you can move through the kind of courtyard. But generally, it feels right. The structure feels right. The sort of ideology of trying to make sure everybody has like an expansive space in the unit. That's really nice, and you actually executed that quite well. And circulation works generally. But the one thing you might do is, like as everybody says, maybe pare it back a little bit, and have kind of fresh eyes again. You have to be very critical about the things you do, and you get better at it as you advance. So I understand it's in second year. But then you could say, well, I don't want to walk like a robot when I'm on the kind of courtyard. I don't want to like similar automata. You can see the sort of implications of like computation on the project. Sometimes you might want to sort of erase it, like maybe unblot things a little bit. Maybe you need squiggly lines somewhere. Maybe you need plot or something. Like the landscape could operate as something that maybe isn't rectilinear, right? And it's a bit more freeform too. Yeah. And maybe that plays a role in how the architectures are arranged too, the units are arranged too. Maybe you could output the kind of rectilinear forms, but then maybe you begin to crack them somehow, right? Like if the units break, and then I could put a window between the sort of void, like kind of bend things a little bit. So you could have even more fun. I'm sure it's probably a lot of fun playing around the computer, but the kind of higher level fun is actually when you start sketching, overlaying other ideas, and throwing in other things at the kind of computational outputs. But the structure feels right, and it feels it's somewhat minor, but actually quite important when they're left out. Small things you could just do to sort of completely have the project really arrive.
Just my suggestion would be for your portfolio is to draw sections in room scale, with first image, showing where the light is coming from, then move over and do a section that actually involves the other unit, and then step outside and go to the street, and then draw there. And in those three different scales, you can tell us a lot about what this is to you, not to us. I think we can all figure it out, but you know what you have.
Yeah.
So I would add that.
Yeah, I think the module itself should we just make sure that the module is not too sort of solipsistic or like wrapped up in itself, because it's not just the module itself and the space inside, but the space that's in the module and the space that are outside have a very powerful connection to each other. If I look at this room right here, it has this generous piece of glass right here. So this piece of space actually could feel twice as big as it actually is and have a sense of connection, ownership, or like responsibility for the piece of space that's outside. It does have a sidewalk that walks through the middle of it, so maybe that's not optimal. But if you could instead, so one way to think about it is like you have a module and you have a condition where a wall is removed so that the space on the inside has a sense of extension. The module might include this wall as well, right? So it's not just this piece, but it's this wall and the piece of space that's in between it, and a solid piece of wall here. And so part of the algorithm for how the rule set goes together is that the module has a blank wall that terminates and defines private space associated with private interior, private outside space associated with private indoor space. And this always matches or pairs up with a blank wall that happens with an adjacent unit in some way.
That's a good point. Like right there, you then maybe your circulation goes on the wall without opening,
Right.
and you solve it. Right there, you have a private space now. So it's a lot of this evaluation where you output a computer and okay, what is working, what's not working, what can I rethink in my inputs of the module, and you come back, it's a loop system. It always makes better and better the more you look at it.
Thank you, Craig.
Thank
you.
y'all.
Very nice.
You next? Yeah, you're going. You go to the download section. Okay. To download, so I just downloaded it. This is here. Okay.
Press Control.
Sorry? Just go back. Go to Windows.
Now, sorry.
I go to view.
Go to View.
Yeah. And then
Go to full screen mode.
All right. Hello, my name is Yaya. Our project was about the urban ecologies, and we had a research at the beginning of semester about the site plans. Like we were deciding, we were researching how site looks like 1900s and 2000s, and then we decided to pick up a site and work on it. So I decided to pick this site right there. There was a construction in that site, and which is stopped right now. nobody used that site, so, and it was nearby the 7th Street. That's why I decided to choose and work on that site. And also, since I was gonna, like, since we are supposed to build a apartment unit, it is a very nice spot to work on. And a little bit about the research. So basically, at the beginning of the semester, we had to research some sites in downtown Austin area, and our site was the 7th Street, and we researched the public spaces and the commercial spaces, like the buildings and residential buildings and all, and then then I decided to choose the place where a lot of commercial buildings had. And this is the unit and the site relationship. Basically, this part is the 7th Street, and they're all apartment buildings nearby. Also, there was a school, the college. I can just show you from here. There is this Houston University. So since there is a college in that in this site, I decided to put my apartment unit there so students can live there as well. Also, the buildings in this site is mostly horizontal, and I just want my building to point out. That's why my building is more vertical. Okay, so these are just screen.
So what is your basic unit? What is your unit that you multiply?
The units I'm showing right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I see a lot of them, trying to figure out
Yeah. So this
what's
was,
the main player?
yeah, I'm just gonna show you the second one. So at top picture, you see the top view of the building. That's basically my my purpose before I start the project was putting a lot of shared spaces so people can meet and gather together rather than just solid units. So I have a lot of shared spaces in this apartment, and also at the same time singular and two king bedrooms as well. So these are just some shots from. So as you see at top picture, there is this singular unit, and behind of it there is a two unit apartment units as well, and the one at the bottom is just a gathering space and the apartment office. I was just thinking about it, and this is just the outline of my apartment. And the way that the private and public spaces work is basically there is always a shared space between each units. So it is like my vegetation, like the plants and the private unit, then again the gathering space and private unit, as you see here. So this one is one of the private unit, and this is the second one, and it has the little balconies here. This is the section cut of my
Back up
apartment.
one, please. Did you say there's private space between two public space between two private units?
Yeah,
Do we see that?
these are the, oh, sorry. So the top one is the public, most bold ones.
Right.
Bolder one is public, and this one is private.
Is there another private space on the other side of the public? Is that what you just said?
Yeah, so basically the same thing here. The first one is private, and the second one is the public.
Is the public, is that
One.
is that sorry, John. Is it public, is that like a living room?
Yeah,
Or, okay, yeah, it'd be nice, like, just like, just some chairs that just say like, living room, bedroom.
yeah, but it is like,
Or is it more complicated than just assigning?
yeah, but, yeah, I know what you're saying. But the thing is, here, there are just singular units, so everything is in one unit, just one for one person, each unit.
The public is, anyone can go there, or is the
Public is
part of
like
a private unit?
open to space, like,
So anybody can go to the public space?
it is
Private
like
space is a
hallway,
living unit?
yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I get it.
So this public means like the hallways that
Yeah.
goes to privates.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you might just call this communal space, outdoor, like, fine, or you have to describe it really succinctly, so you understand the distinctions between the two. But I get it now.
Yeah, did you build any physical models of this?
Yeah, I have
Do you want to?
the study model.
Yeah, show us.
You got a lot of them too.
This is the public one, and
Yeah.
here it starts the private ones. And these are the section cuts. This one is the section cut of the building, X-zone section cut. As you see here, like this is the public space, this is the public space, this is right here, public space, right here, public, and there, and that's how I connect the private and public spaces. And yeah, this is the section cut that I got it from this site.
I have a question, I'm trying to understand this. So this is a unit on one level. How do you stack that? Do you have more bills? You can see how do you stack and you start to shift them? Or did you see that in your digital model?
Yeah, I did.
I'm seeing it one dimension, and I would like to see, you have a very complex set that I'm trying to figure out of what's running, what's more important than something else. And so to me, this is, I can see what you're doing here, but then I'm trying to imagine where's the other piece, is it shifted off, and what are the spatial opportunities that it gives you. I am too dumb to look at this and say, oh, I know exactly how you're working. I have to see it, and I have to take it apart, and I need to get my mind to, being this three-dimensional object. That's what I was just asking.
Yeah, the thing is, when I was working on project, I was like, I had hard time to do the spaces as well. That's why, like, I have lots of like the shared spaces, because I thought in regular apartments it's just solid building. So rather than that, I want to have like here lots of shared spaces. Right here, and these are the units. Like these are the single units. And in a circular way, it goes like in a circular shapes. And on the edges, they're public spaces, basically. And this one is just the perspective
Okay, so
image.
just, hang on just for a second with this. Okay, so here is, when I'm looking at this, I'm trying to untangle, trying to figure out what you or your machine was thinking as you're moving these pieces. So is it about taking the horizontal unit and then shifting it off for a certain amount
Yeah,
in order to give you the void in between? I'm just trying to understand what you were thinking as you were moving these pieces.
so I had two types of units, and I was just playing with them on each floor, and I was putting them to different places. And in the emptiness, like those empty places, I just made them public, like for people to gather. This all, the green spaces and all, I just put them to have more appearance of the gathering space. And this elevation right here, you can see, this is one of my units, and here you go to the next unit, and these are their old units right here. Yeah, I know it's kind of hard to explain, but throughout the work, I understand like when a person goes upstairs with the stairs, it's easy to circulate around the building because there are just 4 public spaces around the building, and in the middle just the private ones.
So you have more drawings?
Sure.
Will you finish with the presentation or?
Yeah, I think that's it.
Well, let me just ask you another question. Can you tell us what is it you love about your project? What were you excited that you saw and how that had a potential to grow, to multiply the vertical straight around the angle? What did you like about it? What were you excited about?
So, as I said earlier, instead of living inside more privately, I like it to open more public. So that's why I put my private spaces more inside of the building, and around those private spaces, I added this public. And I put a lot of apertures to make the lighting. And in the middle, as you see, the middle of the apartment is empty. So
Do you have
there's,
an image that you can tell us what you were just telling us?
yeah,
I think you're generating a lot of very interesting relationships. It seems to me that it's hard to figure out which is the one that you prefer, which one do you like, which one is working, which one is not working. I think you have a lot of possibilities, but I want to know what you think.
okay. So this is the top view of my model.
Okay?
There's, as you see, my lumen scale here. This is the public. That's what I was trying to say. And there is this stairs goes up, and this is the private space. And when you go here, there is another public space again. And when you come here, there is another private space. Like it goes circle. So yeah, here, this is the public space, and you go all the way there, there is my private space too. And this is more about like for people to gather, basically, instead of like just whole apartment.
Honestly speaking, it's very confusing your presentation or how you represent the project.
Yeah.
Because like you're jumping from kind of renderings or subjective views to a site plan, to a diagram, to a plan, which is not really a plan. The drawings are very incomplete. Like when you have the plan, even the walls are not hatched. They're like they're not embedded in the context. Like don't see how your project actually sits on the site in a plan or in any section. The renderings part where you cut it or is even not showing the full building. For perspectives where like a drone would fly, but not a person would stand. It's very difficult to understand actually the program, the space, and the observation for that project. And the model is interesting, maybe helpful if it would show the link to different floors. But it seems so that this proportion is very different than from when you have the full building, or when I see this height or like the length of the walls. This seems to be much more like scaled maybe in comparison to your model. See that it's very hard to follow. Like it seems there's news on stage like it seems that you have interesting ideas how you speak about this or what you want to achieve, but it's hard to follow it, to understand this.
You know, part of architecture, which is really hard, is we draw, we make a model, and the ability to actually ourselves to read them. That's hard for all of us. And we train to look at something, whether it's 2D or 3D, and then to ask ourselves, how do I really read this? Does my mind mentally occupies and understands that? So you have a lot of really exciting possibilities, but I think it's hard for you to tell what's better than something else. Or like, what is it you like about it, or what you don't like about it. If you don't like about something, what do you do when you change it? Then you ask yourself again, am I there? What am I after? Having this sort of right questions of what you're looking at. What psychologists tell us that our minds are, when we're presented with a very complex situation, that our mind goes automatically on trying to figure out what's the really big idea here, because we want to understand of what we're looking at. So use those inner abilities and really question, I'm looking at this, what is it telling me? I like it, I don't like it, I need to move it, I need to shift it, I need to turn it upside down, I need to tilt it. And then when you do that action, then you ask yourself again, okay, what is it? Is this working? Because you need to figure out how to answer that yourself or what you're looking at. And that is hard, because that's for architecture is about trying to decode our actions.
Yeah. I think like you started with a very complex unit just from the beginning and you lost control, but you kept the complexity and got complicated where you don't have control over it that much. And that's where you back up and say, okay, I'm making this complicated, not complex. I'm confusing myself. I'm having a hard time understanding circulation, units, what's public, what's the definition of public, is it shared space or public, or is it public just for the units around it? So always, when you're getting like confused about it, step back and make it go back simple. Like start with a simple module, aggregate that, and then learn from it. Don't just stick with the complex thing from the beginning. Complexity is building simple layers, and that's how you're going to present to us. Because if you present to us your final, we're like, how did we get here? So present it like at a simple step. It's easier for us to understand, digest, and really turn on the project. I agree, like drawing, it's a little bit, you have to like draw it a little bit better for us to understand. It's really hard to follow through. I think those drawings, the wall that you're now bringing the sections are getting a little bit better. And then you're modeling the 3D drawing.
There.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Show us, I mean, we can see more there. Yeah.
And then the same thing, like sometimes flat sections help us a lot more than this 3D, very complex thing. Like we are okay seeing flat drawings and the traditional drawings. Like that's how we start learning that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why we do those. I mean, you know, I'm not interested in seeing something that looks good. I mean, it's not, you should look good and you should be able to have the capacity, the ability to make anything look good, but you do it for yourself so that you can see how it relates to the surrounding neighborhood and the street in the background, how you enter the building, how you move up and down the building, where private space is, where windows are, to help you, just the regular plan and the pure vertical section help you see the harder questions as clearly as possible so that you have a handle on the overall organization and the overall, just the objective parts of the idea. And those you have to go through a step where those are all like super clear and super oriented. And if you don't understand what's going on, I would animate and I'll draw all the furniture and imagine people in there, and draw some kids playing and start to imagine how it'd be occupied and get your head inside every one of the spaces that you're making and understand if it begins to work or not. Then you put it back together into the whole package and you can show us things that are very, very beautiful. But there's some fundamental things that I think are not present, or maybe they're there and we can't see them. That's the other possibility. Everyone in the room is designers. We have a whole room full of designers. It's nice to see the big screen, but if you haven't figured out, we only get to see the image you've chosen us to see one at a time. We're used to looking at, we're supposed to review your whole entire project. So somehow you need to figure out with, as designers, with the stuff you have in the room, how we're gonna get to see the whole thing in some way. I mean, if I haven't gone yet and I've seen the reviews right now, I'd figure out how to untake my drawing and tape it to that table so that we can see two things at once, and we have some back and forth in terms of how we're gonna manage our conversation about what you got. Just an idea.
Yeah, I think, yeah, there's just a lack of resolution. I feel like you've had some interesting ideas with your unit and how like light is kind of penetrating through the space and how kind of create visual things that you're carving and how those begin to combine and stack. And I think, you know, we're just lacking context. We don't, like, this is essentially where we were 3 weeks ago. You got to a point of making a composition that you liked and then resolve it. So I think you just need to, you know, like push it further and think about how do I make this more realized as a building, and you know, start, like John was saying, just start drawing in people. How do they experience it? You know, what's happening in those spaces? Right now, it's just these kind of, you know, 2 foot thick walls that are holding up a variety of different spaces, and it's a little unclear as well.
But look, even as, I mean, it's clear as an open studio, so it's kind of messy. I'm okay that it's not 100% works because of the complexity. I'm not okay with that. I can't read in the way the drawing. So when I see a plan that the stair has nearly the same width as a wall, and it can't work. No? As long as the basic elements like look as they work, I can assume that you can figure it out later. That you need it needs more projection. But the ideas are there. Or this 1-3D sectional cut has a great quality of like this in a courtyard and so on. So when you show this with the swimming pool or this like entrance area, so you put out some atmospheres, but again, or when you show 3 different side plans, they all have different orientation, different shading, and also different geometry, right? Then like it needs more care simply of elaborating drawings.
I'll talk about maybe, I guess, review management. I hope, I didn't tell this in my class, but it's nice if you have pairs who are taking notes for you, so that way you remember anything that are being said. Because I think for you it's actually crucially important to recall comments and like just do drawing and representation. I mean, you could have a fairly crappy project and draw it very well, and this is usually clarity, but you could have something that's quite maybe special, but you're not able to sort of understand, other than you, nobody else able to understand how special that thing is, just because it's not depicted or represented with the high level of clarity. So yeah, like I got a body here, if you very represented, you just make bullet points.
This is all being recorded too. So.
Yeah, or if it's recorded, like make sure you watch it, you know, but something tangible that you can see, and okay, next time I go and review, what the issues the last time? There's a lack of clarity, and it's sad that you got to interrupt them multiple times, and you know, it's kind of annoying, but part of the reason is just because of, you know, the way you're depicting things, and I'm sure you're capable of, if you're capable of doing that, you're capable of learning how to draw. It's probably easier to actually draw lines. It's like add line weights and all that stuff. Or the basic conventions, like if you cut the sections, you should have in a site plan as opposed to showing it in a kind of aerial view. So you do have something special going on here. I saw the renders with lights and kind of courtyard light coming through with a kind of nice complexity to the project. I just wish it was just like drawn better. And don't do these renderings. Don't do that. I told my students don't do them. Just try and use like accents with like line weights, make 2D, the basic line stuff, and try and make those the kind of sort of ways you're showing 3-dimensional sort of aspects of your project, rather than maybe, not to say don't do renderings. I'm saying it because it's you need a lot of hours to make them really nice. It's like 12 hours per image outside, 10 hours. If you're really good, maybe 6. But you need a lot of time to do that. But the line drawings, you don't need that much time to actually produce a high level of clarity. Something that looks quite good. The section from Fate, where she cut that was a really nice section, but that she just cut it from the model, she didn't render it. So maybe you might need to just say, okay, I think your big task is like representation. Conceptualization, you probably have that, something nice formally about what you have. But it's like, oh, I just got to do the basic. It's, you know, it's half your work in the second year, like you just learn how to draw well. You got time to get there, but start doing it early on. The sooner you kind of grasp it, the better off you are.
Thank you, guys.
Can we get two tables up here and then hang drawings underneath the front of the table so we can see additional information? There's a table over there that they use, and there's the drawings and models in the room that are not able to see or take advantage of. Leave it up to the students to set up the computer the way they want.
Good enough. Do you want them to be?
Like I said earlier, they should design the experience of the review they get, understanding the limitations, including where the furniture is in the room, how we're going to set up the lighting, how we're going to be reviewing information, how far away our chairs are from the chair that they're looking at. They need to be designing how this is set up and control that as a designer, the physical environment and the atmosphere of the event in which their projects with their semester long work is getting, like, fed back. That's how, sorry, I'm saying it louder so they can get the message.
Yeah, rolling your eyes.
I mean, it wasn't actually yelling, they're just saying loud enough so everyone can hear it. I tell my students that all the time. It's easy enough to get.
Yes.
Yeah, like maybe at a minimum, tell us where your drawings is clean up so we can figure out.
Yeah, it would help us, because I've been trying to find them all along, it's helpful, because our job is see the big picture, but we only can see one at a time on the screen, so this is a challenge. But you gotta figure out how to I don't remember them all, but hey, go back to image number, like, 14. Yeah. Which, before you start, sorry, the one thing about Zoom that surprised me, reviewing projects on Zoom, is having a second monitor and the entire presentation on PDF. So I can see the image the student wants me to see at any given moment while they're speaking, and I can scroll through the whole thing so I can say, oh, interesting point. And at the end of the review, I said, go back to image number 5. The whole thing would come together. It's actually was like the amazing antidote to the limitation of the single image digital presentation. We don't have that right now.
It was great because like cinema.
It was amazing when you got the
You're
whole
like
thing.
reading
I know,
words
I know.
to the screen.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, we're good.
Okay, so, hi, I'm Dallas, and then, sorry. So, the intention of my overall design is to create this integration of greenery and this transition between public to private spaces to create that certain balance of the variety and create this variety of activities that both private and public shares. Oh, and then I did the site analysis mostly about the programs of the buildings, where on the right side is more commercial, on the left side is more residential, and the red circle part is where the site light chose to be. Also, look into the amount of impervious coverings that where the kind of light orange is, that so I can make in use of those impervious coverings or like those non-human void space. And then this is just a render of the site, and that's where I pick. And those buildings being taken off is just kind of like just some barber shop or some carpet shop. So I think it's fine. Oh, and then that's the main street is 7th Street, and the left side is where Allen Street, and then the right side is the Garbage Street. So I have this initial concept, or I like experience and play around with in Unity, and I have this idea of shifting spaces and overlapping circulations, overlapping private and public spaces. This is where I came up with this physical model, and basically some overlapping areas could also become like landscape or dirt space for planting, and this is just like a conceptual image. And how I started differently, I started creating like shells that can slide units in, and I did like a tiny Okay, it's kind of not moving, but I create shells and units, and I create a like diagram of constraints to form my aggregations. And these are my units, and those light gray ones are my shells. And I'll see what
Present it.
presents it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, okay, it's moving right now. So basically it moves like that, and then it's how the units shift into my shell, and that's just a top view. I couldn't really get into work on Illustrator, so, and then this is how I form my aggregations by shifting plates and units. So my units come after that I created my shells. And that's my first floor plan that I came up with some main circulation coming from both sides, whether it's facing the streets or the residents in the back. I have a total of 5 floors where I have main two clusters, one on the left, one on the right. One is a little bit larger, and the cluster on the right stops at the 4th floor. So, where I have my second floor plan that has a intersection of the plates that create more public spaces, and then the 3rd floor where just mainly units, and oh wait, I have 2 third floors. Sorry, that's a typo. And then my 4th floor, some greenery space, and my 5th floor. Sorry, those are typos. And as we move up the floors, it becomes more private, but on the 1st and 2nd floor, those are mainly public. And this is a site plan that I created just to show different elevation that as you move up, the shape becomes darker, the gray shape. And that's my overall aggregation that I came up with by shifting those shells. And I did a section cut in the long way, but it's not fully resolved yet because I figured that the difference in like the shifting my shells create like problems when I design my units. And that's the section of the shoulder side. And this is a bird's eye view when I render my building on site, where that's the facade that's facing the street, which this is Butter Street, and the other side is Allen Street. And that's the other side, when you're driving to the main 7th Street. And some detail shots that I have of potential activities happen on the 2nd floor. And the last image of some upper activities that you can sit and chill. And yes.
The model's a little different, is that right?
Yes, it's just a study, like
Okay.
how it came up
All right.
my final aggregation.
Okay. It's a little earlier and you have a little more density now, right?
Oh, this is half of my site.
This is half of the size.
They didn't have the model.
It's twice as big as it.
Yes.
It's quite a long-
I have quite a lot of units. I
Okay,
realized my site are pretty big.
How many units do you have?
Oh, okay, I have 50 on the ground floor, and then 30 something, and then 7.
Do you have a plan for like a unit type?
No,
Like
that's,
beds and window, kitchen, restrooms and all that?
that's something I haven't like figured out yet.
How big are the units?
Oh, units are range from like 500 square foot all the way to maybe like 900 square foot.
So, I mean, it's reasonable sizes. Yeah, it'd be nice to, there's something very nice about your project, the way they add things aggregated. I like sort of diagonals in the interior of the courtyard too, that it's following the rhythm of the sort of slant of that street. And you just consider like maybe that edge on the ground, it might be a bit too jaggedy if you're walking down. I live in well, this is my project. We try to make it kind of walkable on 7. But imagine somebody walking down there, maybe there's a way you want to control how maybe sort of smoothen out or attenuate the jaggediness on the ground. I think it might help with the project. You don't have to be relentless with the system and like have it vast and like diffuse sort of the entirety. It's like this totalizing thing. You gotta at some point, like, that's similar to the first comment where you gotta have control moving things around. But there's something nice about it. The kind of representations are quite nice. It's really, I wouldn't mind chilling up there in the middle of the building. It would help if you just kind of like just lay out like one type or like two types,
Yes.
so that people begin to have more faith in it.
Oh, yeah. And then,
Then put that in your presentation. Yeah, like hive. It's like, oh, this is one.
like the point of my shifting in plates is to layer my plates to create like other different kind of spaces, like say their seating areas, like the ones above. You see the plates get thicker, and then you can put trees.
Congratulations, really nice project. Of course, it's second year, so you can push it a bit further, and I would think further. I mean, now it's nice. So you have a kind of original system, or it has some kind of characteristics, because hey, it's really nice kind of quality of the block and so on. Well, you get a really nice design, proportions are appropriate and so on. What I think the problem of the project now at the moment is of course how you monitor it to the second street. It's on one hand it's nice that you create a kind of wall. I see also for the wall it's nice that you formally for the abstraction is nice. So here for the abstraction I read it that actually you want to open more to the sides. So this is more blocked with traffic. So that's already great. Now, I like it that you abstract it that way. So it has a nice ratio between being abstract or kind of massive and speaking of kind of qualities, still bringing partly the fenestration. Now in the next step, like you said in the beginning, the original on the side, now there are some shops.
Yeah.
And now like what you replace them just purely with residents. So no, they're purely like apartments. So why should people now walk there? If they're only apartments, I don't have any reason to walk there because I'm just maybe I'm walking my dog, or I'm going home. But from
I have more to add. One thing that I developed on my ground floor plan is like I do have regular units, but I just thought of like something that can welcome people in and like prevent people to come. So I do have like a small library on the bottom where I have this like large space because it's where the intersection is and it doesn't have too much light in if I have units right there. And then I was thinking about having a daycare having in the middle. Right.
It's very important that you say this.
Yeah.
And I think even like the first floor, I wouldn't see them not as apartments at all because they have like people just crossing your main kind of window. Or they, first on the first floor you have one side ventilated units, which I would always avoid. Like it's not decent because they get also very deep floor plans, very dark everywhere. And then in terms of privacy, like people just walk in front of the window. Like it's also. So in reality, you have the whole day, you have the curtains closed because you don't want to see how you sit on the sofa. So, but if that would be an office, I would be, or a small shop again, I would be super happy if people look at my office and maybe stop and want to come to my architecture studio, or whatever. So this could be easily just change the program, or change it with the floor height, for example. And then the program that is also that offers all much more mixed use, then could actually be probably appropriate.
A lot of really nice work here. I appreciate your knowing what the density is and addressing the density. Tell me a little more about these investigations.
Yes, these are my early studies. Originally I was interested in like shifting in place and how like the shifting in place in the stairs could lead into some like planting area, feeding areas within the units. That's where I started, and some like sticking up public place that could create this kind of circulation.
Yeah.
That's where I started, but
Well, I think you're onto something really interesting. You know, there's a lot of projects that are like arrayed and stacked, but this starts to be something which is potentially arrayed and nested in sections, which I think is unlocking the potential with all of the tools that you're using. That I think will start to go. Could be. I think you're onto something really interesting here, especially with a much more refined model. Though that one seems to try and go an entire floor of a giant ramp that's too steep to use. So maybe it's not an entire floor, but maybe it's just like a split level. So there's like a high unit and one that's half the distance down, or maybe it's just a third of the distance. But you start to look three-dimensionally at how these might interlock with each other in a way that makes sense, and which would allow you to get to all the units in terms of circulation in a way.
Yeah, I did play, when I was doing my models in Virgo, I did play with the shifting in space, but it ended up does not work well when I multiply them, or like, I don't know, like something I didn't figure out.
It might be hard, yeah, I would think so, but what's really interesting about that is that if you simply have stacking, the quality of all the spaces is identical. You're never in a space that's of a different height, or that challenges your experience as body and space of moving through something that provides variety. But if you can find a way in section to begin to challenge that, or offset that, or interrupt people's expectations, there's, in my opinion, there's this feeling where you're more aware of yourself when you see that something happens in the vertical direction. And so I think you're really onto something there. That even if you don't get to it in this semester, it's the end of this semester, never mind. You won't get to it in this semester. It's something I would encourage you to kind of keep that idea of investigation as you move further in your next project. It's something really powerful.
Yeah, the variety in your units is not only the square footages, but also it's in a loft type. You know, then you can get double height, single height, those can start to line together. Right? So when you cut your section, we see these different volumes that we're interested in. If not, it just becomes flat, 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 and it's the same height all the way through. It's just different sizes in area, and the volume does not change. So the idea is like, you can take it to start thinking of volume change. And that first model, it's kind of already telling you, hey, there's a volume opportunity here, because tapers down, what happens underneath is there, that's a big question too.
Yeah, something interesting there.
This of the jewel inside, no? The jewelry wall. It's a really beautiful model. And I saw like in the beginning the case studies that we had from very scale, like one project which has also like, actually like the glass corridor. So I see how you take on like a precedent study. It turns actually in a quite unique interpretation. It's very nice to see. Because what John says, like, please continue over the project. Those ideas when you want to find, it's clear you can't directly embed them and articulate them. It needs great ideas in a long time. And it's nice. This is also, look, the project is not only like a final application. It's much more broad what you learn through those. And it's also for all, like, we always like the study models and so on. It's always great to see like your exploration, the ideas.
And then there's some explanations. This is just my aggregation study model that I can work and shift things in. This is just a massing model.
Yeah, it's nice how you make this.
It's interactive.
So,
You make this by hand, or do you use like a laser?
Laser cutter.
How do you get it not to be charcoal?
I don't know. It never really happened to me.
sometimes you see lucky.
How do you not get
That's
charcoal?
lighter.
I think I turned down.
Yeah,
Like I changed some settings.
Early in the morning.
Okay.
Okay, you're on the plan. This is nice how you did this, because it becomes kind of a useful way to think about your project.
Yeah, it really helped me develop my final one.
So that's I try to get my folks to kind of do it, but it seems
And
like a
then
lot
I
of
have-
heavy lifting too.
I hate some
Make it happen.
openings to see like whether light could come in or
Yeah.
And
Nice.
I glue some together to make sure I have some stays in.
I'll say there's some things you could. The project is really nice. There's some things that would maybe even help it a bit more, and it's not something maybe that applies as a general kind of formal comment. So you have the diagonal, which is express one into the street's edge, but the interior of the unit doesn't have to be diagonal, so you can begin to straighten that line up. So, you have that edge of swing, so again, you have to say, okay, I have to begin to push back. So I can have one edge here, with the right edge, it's also one project. But these could begin to become straight, but it's more,
And that will show up when you start laying out stuff, you know, so they do.
Yeah.
Why am I using a diagonal? This
Yeah.
is complicated.
It's like, it's like that lays out in the notebook when the building is slanted and the stool is slanted too.
Exactly.
So there's you have to find a way to kind of maybe refine something a little bit more.
I think you do enjoy what you're doing, and I encourage you to continue with that joy of exploring, because when I said this is just a big exploration.
Before you go, what you show some sections that you drawn.
Yes.
You guys thinking, okay, she's talking about sections too much. One of the ways in which, when we're looking at your portfolio, we want to evaluate how you perceive the space. And the sections, and not this abstract section, but the section where I'm standing in space. And this is for everybody. Be sure that your project has a section of your room, your public space, your street. Really important, because that will tell us how you perceive the space. Because here we have to use our imagination to get it, oh, how do I get in there? This is big enough. Your body measures the space. And I like Corbusier, what he said, a plan is a generator. I think he was wrong. I think we should think about sections as a generator, because that's one drawing that our body is in space, and we know exactly our relationship between the wall, the ceiling, where the light is coming from. So for all of you guys who were on the portfolio review, right, be sure you have section that inhabit, that has person scale.
And if there's, your section should be your most interesting drawing, if there's any way you can figure it out. I mean, it's Anna's right, the plan is where you solve the problem of configuration and move it around, but the section is where it starts to come to life in terms of, I'm in a space where I feel tight and small, or a space where I feel like some relief or some sense of connection vertically and horizontally out to the greater world. And they have the potential to be the most wonderful drawing, and it takes a long time to figure that out. It took me forever to figure that out. And it took year 5 out of 7 years in our capacity to get that, to understand that. The sooner you can get there, it's present in this thing. This has a beautiful little section through it. It's really, really intimate and open at the same time. So there's no combination. You can get that in the section, that's your most important document. We do look for that in the portfolio review. If you're stacking stuff to solve problems, then you don't quite get it yet. So, but you're starting to get it, but embrace it.
That's actually a very nice section. But when you don't wait till you finish your project to cut the sections. You should cut them as you're working on the project. So they become healthy. It's like, all right, at that point, that area is a bit dark. Maybe I need to like switch things a little bit more in promise the project. But I like that the sections, just as a kind of drawn aesthetic object, I think it's quite beautiful. It could be a bit more informative, so just stretch it out with time. As I said previously, so it would be nice, like show the streets, how the thing hits the curve, runs edge, and then you can like maybe zoom out on that one and maybe draw it regularly. But this kind of scale of the long section, it shows a lot of like sort of nice intricate sort of aggregations going on. It's not, there's no like sameness in the projects.
I like always the 3D section, but if you make it really 3D, now it's computer, but you cut in 3D like a 2-flat shot. So this is actually, when you really see it more as a landscape, when you open the spatial complexity, you open it up, and then you uncount the develop it really as a landscape, 3-dimensional. And it's like really understandable how those movements goes actually here for project. So now, so don't cut this really as straight thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I'll take this one.
Some of these spell, so if there's a broken stress, that's why.
All right, wow, this is one person, half novel.
Yeah. Yes, some of them might be like a little broken because like I think one fell earlier. So.
That's part of their life, it's okay.
Yeah, the one on the far y'all's left is the final model. So. I don't think this is the right one. Do you have the words? No, but I don't think this is the right file. I'm just wondering where if he has the box open. Oh, here it is. Okay.
Can you download this?
Download it. It's just loading. Oh yeah, just downloading it.
That should already be downloaded. Unless you uploaded it again.
I think it wasn't the right one because I was missing one of my pages. Okay, and then
Just go to the downloads on the bottom.
right here. Or do I go for the newer ones?
Downloads, yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
There we go. There you go. Okay. Continue. Okay. So we got that working. Hi, I'm Lizzie, and this is my final project. So first I want to start off by talking about my site. So I did have the same like zone that Faith had earlier. She went first. And she did bring up the fact that we do have a more residential northern side and a more commercial southern side. So the point of my project was pretty much bridging, and I wanted a way to connect these two sides of East Austin. And so this program diagram came in handy for that. And then, how do I? Okay, and so the site I chose ended up being where pretty much I chose two different sites and they cross over 7th Street. And I thought it was a good area to pick because you do have there's like an elementary school down here in the south. It's like left, it's like right near the left, it's right like cut off. And then you do have all these homes behind this bigger site, and so it's replacing this gas station and then a pawn shop and then like I think it's like an auto shop, and there's a lot of them in this area, so I didn't think that would be too much of an issue. And so this is my site plan with my building on it. And it is between, this is Morella Street and then here's Northwestern Avenue. Okay, so when thinking about our design, I went back to the original concept models we had. So the Unity model we did, I was playing with plates and pretty much created like these like modules with like this, random like space inside, and then like this very direct type of circulation, and it like wrapped around, and like I just kind of made different connections with that. And then another thing we looked at was I looked at the Fuji Apartments, and so based on like the two topics that we like researched, I came up with these 3 types of modules where I had like 1, 2, and 3-story apartments based off the Shikuji plans, and then I used the same type of like connections with my Unity model to create different types of unit combinations, and like they steadily got like bigger and more complex until I had this final shape that I would sort of carve away at so that it would fit inside my, the space I had for this building. And then here are the floor plans I ended up creating. So I do have 3 types of units, 1, 2, and 3 stories, so they can accommodate anywhere from like 1 person in a studio space to like a family in like a 2-bedroom apartment. And then these layouts are pretty much based off those Fuji Apartments, and then you'd go up the stairs, and then for the studio apartments we did just put a Murphy bed in just to create some extra space in there for whoever was living there. Okay, and then here are some floor plans. This is my first floor. I did include the layout of the landscape that I did there because I pretty much just like wanted to like pop in some green space where I could, also like letting people have like different types of circulation that they could go through, and giving them different options to just go through these spaces. And then also I have this like kind of front, very public and open area that people could like go under and experience structure. And then these brown spaces are just some examples of like where I put in some soil and allowed for some greenery to like be put in the structure. And then here's the second floor, and then here's just some more floor plans, but with renders. Okay, this is my west facing section. So here you can see that bridging moment, and I did carve into the bridge to create this like open area down here, and then thought that could be like a space for people to like interact and like bird watch or just like socialize and like make this more than just a way to get from the northern part of this building to like the south. And then as the supports for these, I do have like more public facilities. So I think, yeah, this one was a gym area that I decided to put in, and this one was a coffee shop. So like I figured, like people could like come in and like get their coffee, and if they need to go, you know, drop off their kid at school, just cross this bridge so that they don't have to wait like for this busy traffic. And then these are just neighboring buildings just for like as a height reference. And then this is my south facing section. So this is what people will be approaching as they cross from the north to south. And it just kind of shows how you have like, you know, it's like a studio apartment, and this would be like a 3-story apartment, and how you'd like get that variety, and you'd have this like circulation going through.
How tall are those units? What's the space and what's the height inside those?
The units are 17 by 22, and then the height is 8 feet.
8 feet? 8 feet?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
I think it's 8 feet. If not, it might be 9. I was like, I had to put some depth in for soil on some of these, so it might move things around.
8 or 9 works.
Well, I'm looking at the proportion of the volumes. So you said it was 17 by what?
22.
17 by 22 by 8 would make them half much shorter than that.
It could be 9. I'm like,
Okay, anyway.
Yeah.
Proceed.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then, oh, I went the wrong way. This is a perspective just approaching that coffee shop, and that's where the open space that I showed on the plan was. So some of these are raised, and it kind of creates this like tunnel where you can like go through the apartments and reach that the area behind the site. And then this is just another view of perspective. And then here's just crossing that bridge. You can see that open space right here where I carve away at it. And then people could go through either of these sides to cross or through here. And then here's just a view of both of these spaces, and then also the green spaces on the roofs. And the green spaces, I actually developed them more on the final model. I was just figuring it out as I was building this. I don't think I can pass it around because it is. Yeah, but yeah, and it does look different because I developed this. I made this before I actually like finished my drawings.
Yeah.
The study one? Oh yeah, I have the. Yeah, this is just like a bigger version of like these units because I was playing around with like how they would all connect. It's just kind of like all like how I would kind of like slot it in.
So what are the dimensions?
Yeah. So it's like just enough to fit in like a bed and then like maybe a kitchen there.
But how do the body is?
Yeah.
Is this a double height space in here? Where I can put my finger right now? Find it, yeah, it's right there.
No, this is like enclosed. I think I lost that piece or something. I was like,
No, no, that's the wrong answer. Is it double?
Yes, it's a double height space.
Okay, the meeting you want? Okay.
Oh, and then this is just that Unity model. Yeah, it's like the very beginning.
Well,
where
yeah,
it's
turn it on. I should not do this.
Yeah, that's not good. Could you go to show your site plan and then maybe show, come back to this rendering?
the site plan?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
You
I
say
have not
hours.
figured out how to move this yet. Hold on. Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, there's, sorry, the ground for the first floor plan, I guess. Want to show the units. Here we go. Like, try to avoid the 3 units on the ground on a fairly busy street if you can. Yeah, on the north side. And the kind of patchwork on the ground is kind of interesting. Like green dispersed around the units. Nice thing to have. Say though, looks nice in the plan, but in the renderings, now you go to your renderings, it's probably a very obvious thing. So when you do your project, you go to the rendering where you show the ground floor.
These ones?
The rendering, the perspectival view of ground floor. There we go. That
No.
one, the first one. Go back. Two. One more. There we go. That one. So there's something. I mean, there's something nice about this, about the clarity of the building. The white is pure white, and the ground is white. You could easily get a sense of what it feels like, and it's very kind of modernist. Reminds me of kind of Schindler House we have in Los Angeles, and I like that you have like floor-to-floor windows and openings. It's really great. It feels like a nice space. The problem too is that your ground is a bit too dark. So like look at what is obviously kind of off here. It's like, oh, the ground's too dark, and I have a tree, and then there's like a building. Trees are probably not going to get a lot of daylight. So that's the renders could be useful for like as walking through your project soon. Oh, well, maybe I need a courtyard there. Maybe I need to shift things to get a little bit of daylight coming through. And because you already shifted, so use the logic to actually make much more. You're going to shift anyway. So shifting ways actually helps the project across all kind of planes, right? The ground and all the way up. And now you can go to the last, sorry, the axon type one. Then that one. This one is nice. Just as a form of representation. Obviously, you need some more detailing, but that's okay. You have to exhaust yourself detailing everything. But it gives so much clarity to the project. And it's not so hyper realistic, where it's like, oh, then you begin to scrutinize it. It's like, well, it's not done well enough. There's a high level of abstraction to it. But it's, it gives you a taste of the feeling of this thing. And I appreciate that.
There's a lot of sophistication and success in this project. It's a really, really nice project. I'm trying to put my finger on the question I'm trying to ask. There's a version of your presentation, I think, you have enough sophistication and accomplishment in your work. I think you should not be so casual in your presentation. I would work on being more clear about what ideas and what rules you set and what you're testing, and use very, very clear language in expressing it, partially for us, but mostly about you, so that you can see if, does it feel right, or does that feel like that's too much? To start to just clarify your approach. So there's a module that then, let's see if I understand this right. There's a module that sometimes 1 or 2 or 3 units stacked, which almost always stands alone and distinct from the other modules. Occasionally it connects to another one, but it always staggers so that you can read them as distinct vertical elements. And in between them weaves a continuous surface that connects you from one level to the other. If I get that about right, that's what I mean. I would be testing and looking for a really clear description of what you've done here. And I usually do stuff first and then have to have my other part of the brain decode what I did and start to test it, which I think is a very interesting proposal. I think it's a little too tall to work. Like, if you really got to go upstairs to move from one space continuous to another. But I think you might possibly be off a little bit in terms of the height. I just simply think the project is a little bit like more squished than you might be thinking about. So I'll just double check that. It's reminiscent. There's a very interesting project. It's really just a house or a compound of a couple of houses that Sana did called the Moriyama House. It's like 9 different boxes, and they're stacked extremely close together. Sometimes they're just this close together, but they read as distinct volumes in a certain kind of way of putting the whole thing together. And there's something similar to that here. But I'm actually really interested in this connective tissue. And I'm wondering if it's legible enough, or if it needs to be a little bit more connected, but the idea of the bridge connecting the two parts of the project together, the way that you can go through the whole thing is like I'm extremely intrigued with.
The difference between your project and the other project is that there's not like one building, one tower, one person or family.
Yeah.
But you live with several, and also in between those spaces, like there's this one living room or kitchen outside, actually next to you. Yeah.
Right. It's this project.
And this is like, for me, that also like, I think like the first and the last finish, they have something there in between. Like the side plan, for the kind of, at first like they're quite neutral, like the side layout or the layout is quite neutral. And then you have this overall network connection. It makes from the urban side, it makes it super flexible how you can program, how you can combine actually spaces. And this section now, of course, now you get a hyperdensity. If you stack this out, so we have this mountain, of course, in the interior, you can, in the first floor plan, you at the moment, you're drawing like living spaces. You get by far too less sunlight. Well, of course, it doesn't work. Here, the rendering you do it right. Like here is the open spaces, or I interpret directly with different programs. And I see it's also here when you open or stack those, then you see this open, so like it's here like a platform, or that's an open program. So this gets interesting, and Aaron showed this, I think the president, we had this Hanoi with the space blocks, where also then between becomes the kitchen space, living room, and so on. So I think in terms of occupation must be much more than that, or trust is much more, that you actually have the 2-3 level kind of like shared spaces, which also between different people in a way to introduce as an interior. And that's really like a great project. So that's like that direction.
The reason I jumped on having that thing be open between the two different levels is because I think the potential limitation of this is being overly modularized. Like no space is ever bigger than the box it's in. But if you can start to work in section where sometimes you're in a space but it's double height or it connects to a space up above, you can provide some very powerful relief or an antidote to that. So you can get the distinct read of the individual module, but then you also have this like greater spatial experience in reality.
Yeah, I think that's the next step I was working on, because like for some of the rooms, I think I didn't talk about this, but for some of the rooms on like my plan, I started like playing with like the interconnected spaces, and that's what these are going to be, but I just never got to develop them now. But like I did mess around with like making like blending some of these together, and then also like having some spaces like overlook other ones, which is where I had like.
Maybe a section.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
but there's something really interesting about the hyper legibility of the modules. So back up one, please. Yeah, this is the one where I would just love to see some of this, some of this erased, so that some of this might have an edge that's missing. So there's a little mini balcony, if these things actually connect to the other, start to connect vertically. Some of these might read as just like weaving.
Show that a big
Go back.
Yeah, there you have it. Yeah, this is. I mean, yeah, like this is already like this doesn't look modular anymore.
Outside, yes, but inside, not yet.
Why it's not inside?
Well, I see before separating them distinctly. It's not that the
Yeah,
section
but
is
this is
here.
inside.
That's not inside.
Why it's not inside?
That's outside.
Why you can't use it?
Wait, sorry, what are you saying?
Well, like this for sure that you're using the space. This is super cool. I mean,
The courtyard, isn't it?
No, courtyard space, yeah, but my concern is that we would be a kind of claustrophobic modularity, where when you're inside the space and you feel like, dang, this thing's small. So you have the opportunity with everything you're proposing to provide the antidote. So it's like I never feel trapped in a corner because, oh yeah, I've got a piece of space that connects the glass floor where I can see my room up above, but I still have some acoustic separation, and I can also see out horizontally at any moment inside with inside any space. So I never feel like I'm in a box, even though, yeah, I'm in a box. So there's an experiential counterpoint that you're providing. It's you've got that opportunity in this strategy that you're using right now.
I think that'll help you to avoid like stacking and shifting also. Like if you go back to your unit itself and do some of these modes, but also the instacks and double heights, that gives you a little more richness than just stack and then stack a little bit shift, you know. Because when you cut the section, you're gonna get these horizontal lines always. Like volumetric wise, it's nice in some spaces are double height in the inside and the outside, you know, and some of the spaces are clear to stack. So like this model for me starts to give, even though it's stack, just having this bounded extrusion, gives you that private green space versus a public green space, so you can aggregate a little better just kind of like a tower. I do appreciate your rendering being all white, and sometimes it's easy to build material and we put wood in this landscape software and it looks terrible, so.
I hate that, I hate that to death.
As simple as possible.
You should look up the
You
should look up the Moriyama house, which is this house right here. Is that sauna house I'm talking about? Because on the one hand, it's like 9 boxes. It's like super modular. On the other hand, there's an enormous amount of variation to it. One of our students lived in one of these houses. We went to visit him here. He did residency at sauna. And it was this little one right here. We went in and it was like, but there was a basement you didn't know about that it connected to. There was this surprise in each of the units. So on the one hand, it's hyper legible and it's a box. On the other hand, there's surprise introduced at each moment. A corner is taken out or something connects across, or the crazy Japanese guy that owns the place is living up on the sofa on the top floor with his record collection. It's like these weird moments that actually happen to these things. So you're onto something very, very good.
Which can happen here too.
Yes.
You take your tower, shift it a little bit up, and you have this windows on the bottom to be your rotated garden space.
The other thing that Sana did that doesn't quite work, but they're building in New York, the Guggenheim building. It's like 7 floors of museum, and the way they got light in is they just shifted the box so that light could come in from above. So they took the module of the box, kept it hyper clear and legible, but then jogged it or offset it so they could get light down into the inside, which is better as an idea than it actually worked out. But
and I think it's good when you're doing this shift, you have a reason. I'm just doing a shift to make my section look cool.
Yeah, I mean, most of them I was shifting, that's what started off with us too. I was like shifting cubes, and then like it got way too messy. So I started keeping them more together, but for some
Think
reason.
about being as a cube itself, you're shifting the inside, but the reader itself, the bounding block is still the box.
Yeah, and so for some of these, I do have like, some of these areas become like private, extensions of little balconies and things, and also a way to get to that top floor, like another way to get to that top floor.
I like the modules. I don't mind. I don't think they're claustrophobic. Which is just because you applied a lot of glass in one wall and it's big enough. So I guess maybe the thing to consider is just how you arrange them on a sort of macro scale. On the micro scale, the thing works. We have if you bring in enough light, it's like, oh, why do I need to just? As of easier as moving units, because you're very lucky in assets that you're not like tied to. You have a developer saying, hey, for this many units as possible, you're going to subtract them to make later involve that light.
Yeah.
It's the thing works. Just make it work. I mean, let's make it work a little harder. Actually, even easier because you're doing less work by just moving things. Sometimes it's not about building; it's about not building. It's not about subtraction. If you go back to the renderings again, the Axon one. Okay, I did earlier on. I say don't do renderings, but okay, if you keep them highly abstracted, so don't reach for views. But then I think many of them, when it's capturing materials, it's like that's fine because it's going to be realistic picture and then it looks horrible. So just, if you're going to do it, keep it abstract. Let it feel a bit capsule. It's just kind of showing that. It's really kind of nice to see a view like that. So yeah, you can make it to outline, draw it. But I'll say opposite. It's also showing material, just shows form, shows more general aspects of Steve feels like, and it's successful in this sense. It's a nice view.
How would you study these sections? Yeah. have no idea how big a little it is. But you need to do a nice scale, you need to work the drawing on scale, maybe just be on a little bit of shade, but not black. And, carry that across the street. As far as, the edges, inhabit section.
For the showing actual scale, there's a mixture between like appropriate section and like indicating some scale of functionality. For me, it's a no-go that the stair, okay, you can show the stairs as well, but they even not connect to the levels. That there are no handrails or something indicating what's actually walking surface or just the roof is a no-go. So there's certain things like where you should really like very cautious take care about that. That's really is not readable and not just a sketch one. And it's a very elegant one, but it's actually this shouldn't be.
Yeah, the abstract material, I'm not in this picture of components, those
Thank you.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Somebody come and help for the.
Do you have box open, Baron?
Yeah, it's on the bottom. You got a print. So print.
I know.
It's on one of those tabs somewhere.
One of the other people too?
Yeah, can you just take it and download them? Let me bring one of these out here.
Okay. Does that come off? The thing?
Thank you, Jeremy.
Of course. You want to like stack them all?
We can. Yeah. Jeremy. Yeah. Awesome. Hello, everyone. My name is Tan Lee, and I'm presenting my design for urban ecology project. So first of all, I can talk about my presentation. First of all, for Rasa class, I study space block Hanoi, one of the buildings from my country, which I'm really proud of, just because of the ventilation. Oh, sorry, John.
Okay, start.
We wait for Coco. We can wait for Coco.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's wait for Coco. No problem. We can make small talk.
Small talk, yeah. Yeah.
My name is Tan.
Hi, Con.
Hi,
How
John.
are you?
I'm tired.
Is your project poorly? No, I don't know. Is it? No.
Inhumane, I don't know.
Is this really one of your slides?
Hi, Coco.
Feedback so much.
Okay, I guess Coco is here. Hello, everybody. My name is Tan. This is my design project for urban ecology. One of the president study I study for Rasa class is Playbout Hanoi. One of my I don't want to say favorite, but I'm biased because it's from Hanoi, my country. I love the part that like the light coming in, the little spaces, people sit here, like my auntie and my uncle sit here and like gossip, or like they like play card or something like that. So I want to see how I can use the computation and the code to manipulate a cloud of modules and generate like a form. It was fun and all, but I think I couldn't control the code to the form that I want, so I went completely opposite. And before that, the form that I got from the code generate a form that I felt a little too big. I have to take that one. Yeah. I feel like it's a little too big, so I went with a smaller modules that is more individual or more personalized. It feels like it drop in and just live by itself on the site, almost parasitically, and that felt a little too small. So they start aggregating and just take over like a parking garage, and I felt like that scale is something I kind of want to pursue. So next stop we find a site. It's 619 Tuileries Street. It's just an empty plot of land in the middle of a residential lot, residential block. And I felt like, oh, since there's other people living here, let me occupy that space. Really, that simple. The building ended up being half the lot around here, and the other half are just green grass space. You just walk along the street and then you come in to the grass space. If you are in the other part of the building and you come over and visiting a friend, or if you're a part of the space and you start walking on both sides, there's both sidewalk on the both sides, and then you start entering your unit. And that's 619 Tuileries Street, and I titled it that house. So next up, Project That. Project That is a housing development by me for the Urban Ecology Studio. I want to play with Tetris. Just for fun, here are some blocks you can play around. Okay, sorry. Here's some blocks, and we want to play with them. I like how they connect. I like how nicely they connect together. I like how they can rotate. There's different faces. I like how one can be stationary and the other one can react to it. So all of the units, the 7 units, start aggregating and forming the space. So they end up being about 34 little individual modules, forming 15 units. And a few of them units are communal unit where you can share with another family, another person, and one is just circulation unit. So they end up being 14 livable housing unit from the project. So they aggregate into this form, and there's 3 floors. The top floor is there's less unit, but you can there's roof floor that you can start occupying. The second floor, a little bit more units, and then the last ground floor, you see the circulation within between most of the sides of the building on the ground floor. These units are made of 10 by 10 modules, and the 10 by 10 modules start 10 feet by 10 feet modules start being a little bit bigger into 20 by 10 feet, and they snapping together to create this this house that you see here. The unit were designed to be a little bit more open, both in the section and the plane, understanding that when you start stacking, you start losing some of those faces, and you start having to cover some of those faces. Yeah, so. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm having to.
Keeping the whole thing.
Yes.
You know how heavy it is, nice. Aesthetic.
You could share it. It's too heavy.
I want to repeat again that the unit was designed to be really open at first because understand that when I start aggregating them together, I'm losing some of the faces, I'm sharing the private space. So I'm closing some of the faces and it leaves me with enough open space both on the horizontal and on the up, so that the light can come in when it starts getting too dense. So that concludes the presentation for the bed house. It's a smaller project. I acknowledge that it is smaller than a lot of my classmates because I want to make sure that the unit and the circulation and how each unit can connect to a green unit next to it to create a more livable and enjoyable living experience. And furthermore, is there more? Yes, there's more. We can start aggregating them to be really, what seems to be really dense. But like I said, all of these units are paired with a circulation unit or a green space unit, where you can start getting sunlight in and circulate around that. And this is, I call it the dead war because it's so big compared to the site here, which is a dead house. And I know like first reaction, it seemed really dense, but the unit has a connection to a circulation or a green unit next to it to start getting that open space for your personal living unit. And as more people, you start getting more dense construction. I acknowledge that the project may be a little bit too much. I just want to leave you guys with the last 4 frame of what I think is the core of this project is the experience of the individual person who they want to personalize and organize this space however they want to, because the modules are prefab, the modules are designed 10 by 10, depending on if they want the bedroom, the kitchen, if they want a special room for like practicing piano, anything like that. It is personalized for themselves. And they create their own experience living here. And I think that's all. Thank you.
You're so enthusiastic about what you're doing.
Yeah.
I think it's terrific.
Okay.
I love being in there. I like the sort of the creativity and the multiplicity of this 10 by 10 cube, doing all those different things. The only thing that I would like to maybe pause for a minute, just to look at closer scale, where some of these habitations happen from one space to another. It's probably there, but you want.
I worked it out really well for the bed house.
Sure did.
For MBQ. So you can see how the unit are stacked together.
No, I understand that. I just want to. I know that my body needs the space.
Yeah, there's a family. So that you know what units are together.
I think this is the first plan of furniture today.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's pretty nice,
It's
but,
very nice.
Yeah, it's nice.
and you did the renovation, you edited, you figured out the story, you did it all. I think it's really terrific.
Tell me about that Hanoi house, your precedent. What do you know about that? I'm totally unfamiliar with it.
I remember you want to go back to the pictures.
Yeah, maybe, yeah, go back to like slide number 1 or 2, I think.
It's a typology, right?
Yeah.
It's not a
Yeah.
like house, no?
Orange, how do I get out? Over. Oh, got it. I personally like how every person who lives here has their own circulation or their own experience. Like, for example, the blue, you wouldn't walk up that stairs into someone else's living room if you're not living there. everybody has their own personal experience living here, yet they share some of the really small communal aspect, communal space between when they get to their unit. Also, the more fun thing is like the ventilation and light aspect of the kind of.
Is it something like the blue stairway that gets you up to your green unit is shared by 4 other families, but not more?
I believe that circulation getting up to there is only for that right there. If you are orange, you wouldn't walk up to that.
Right, yeah, but then you get to interact and know the
Yes,
people
yes.
that are there, you play with the kids from the other house.
Exactly.
In the common areas.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it'd be like the space at the end there, right? It's not just circulation
Yeah,
space.
so that, I really want to bring that into the house where you're gonna share, obviously you're gonna share some circulation with your neighbor, but not everybody who lives in this space.
It's not completely anonymous,
Yes,
like it's,
yes.
you know who's supposed to be there. You
Yeah.
see somebody that doesn't belong.
Yeah, exactly,
Okay, yeah.
exactly. Especially the unit quite open,
Yeah.
you're gonna see your neighbor, you're gonna see the person next to you, when you circulate between the green also.
Well, what's kind of brilliant about what you've done is like you've done kind of 2 projects and you've tested it out, fully walkable, more or less buildable, drawn the thing out, you've done it on a small scale, and it feels like the thing works. And it's whether or not I'm convinced that this one is going to be as kind of generous, the big one's you're going to get all the effects you have in the small one, the lights and all the stuff, and it's a really nice kind of shared courtyard you have in there, or shared experiences you have in that smaller one. Even if that's not happening, it's nice to see that you've actually really run down across the spectrum, tested on a small scale. I think your project could just have been that, actually. I mean, and you've resolved it totally, and probably had enough time to actually begin to speculate. But it's nice to be able to do something and do it well enough, have the freedom to actually be experimental.
Yeah.
And we could be less scrutinizing about this very big thing. Because, like, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of holes in that.
Yeah.
Right? There's a lot of like, there's still some people not getting any lights, like you're living in Hong Kong or something like that. But it's fun to see, right? And then we know the questioning that becomes really less. It becomes a more really speculative. I'm treating your second project as more on the scale speculative. So thinking, right? Projective ideas of what architecture could be, how you could expand what you have. But I'm not going to scrutinize it in a very sort of thorough manner, because I say, well, if you're able to actually give the level of care to prove that it works on a small scale, I'm convinced you might be able to do that on a much larger scale. There's something nice about, even that rendering is actually quite nice, so white, it's green. I'd say if you have enough kind of time, maybe it'd be nice to actually prove that the effects you gain on a small scale would be applicable on the much larger scale, rather than purely narrating that you still have the same effect. Maybe like one plan of a segment of it.
Even it's very, very elegantly resolved at the smaller scale, and it's like super high and luxury.
Yeah.
Even if it's like really small. And then when it goes up to that scale, it's kind of like monstrous in an interesting way. So I do think that there's the ability to do that as a module and then really test the rule set that defines whether it's going to work or not. For me, it was this question we talked about how many people actually use the common circulation space. Does that create this other kind of space that are shared by families, where you always know who's in that area, and it's not random or anonymous, or anybody could wonder. It's not a no man's land. It's just like the failure of many of these like very, very big projects. And then there's this question of like, how the hell do you get there? I mean, do I take an elevator up to the middle level and then pick the blue stair up, or is it, do I have to walk up like 5 flights to get to grandma's house? I don't know. So you move the barbells around. I'm not sure how that story works. But there's probably a really sweet spot that's 2.5 times that density.
Okay.
Yeah, also. That would be
2.5 times less.
Well, it's twice, 2 or 3 times.
Oh, yeah, 2.5, oh, yes, that's what I think.
I agree. 0.3 times that much,
I'm really glad it looks like you control things and you really enjoy what you're doing. Like, again, first time we see the plans about furniture, I was a little bit hesitated when you started talking about this as chat trees. The issue with that is like, when you lay it out, it doesn't work, you forget the right dimensions of the unit, but you're proving that you had control over the right dimensions, because you have to get a bathroom, you get all these other components of residential. It's good, like, I think you have full control of what you're doing, and you're very sensible and you're following your gut, which is good, because going to this scale, we'll be talking about something else right now, like reduce it, reduce it, so you came back to this, which I think fits better to Boston too.
Yeah.
Right, like, it's the density demand on the city as well, but I will agree, like, and in between will be nice to see ×2, and then we see the other world a couple of years from now, amazing as well.
Later on, Austin.
Right.
Austin.
Yeah, the one thing I would look for is like, when I see the Tetris blocks in the module, I think, oh man, it's just a little block here, it's potentially claustrophobic. You've proven to me in plan that you very sensibly align stuff, the space feels, yeah, this is a tiny little space, but it feels like it opens continuously that direction and that direction. So you provided the antidote in every case to, even though you're in a very small space, you feel like you're part of a larger space.
Yeah.
In plan consistently. I think in section, you have opportunities to do the same thing, haven't quite done that. They're still kind of like stacked on top of each other, and there's room to make multiple height units that then connect to each other in interesting ways.
Yeah.
That could be, that you could do the same thing in that level, in vertical section.
And also doesn't have to end, the flat plane can continue, that can be covered, that's still part of the character. So you can just also, you're giving the roof sometimes, in the wall sometimes,
Yeah.
because you just want to look up,
Yeah.
how do you reconstruct the office also?
Yes.
You're kind of doing it, but you could go further with that. The best, I don't know if you could go ever see a Paul Rudolph building. It's a really good way to do it, because it's the building I went to grad school in was the Paul Rudolph Art and Architecture building. It's like concrete and it's 7 stories tall and it's impressive. It's like it's like being in a bunker, but no space feels trapped or claustrophobic or enclosed, because every space connects horizontally and vertically to something else. There's always that relief that's provided. And in this case, it's concrete and super solid, so it needs that counterpoint. And that's just the thing I would look for, is to find a way to.
Maybe you can also sink in, like start thinking this is a different dimension.
Yeah.
On this section, maybe the context a little bit, like there's buildings behind it, there's a residential scale, it's not in the middle nowhere.
Gotcha.
It's kind of like, you already have a level where we can give you like an extra. Take of, like, there's some buildings around. You're giving us the car, but what's behind this building?
And I wonder if it should be like right on the ground like that. I wonder if it should like be above a little bit, or have like the odd building that's underneath the ground or something like that. Maybe challenge the flatness of this ground thing, which is what's so great about this section. It really makes you wonder if that couldn't be more charged and activated somewhere.
Well, I think that it's at the level where you might be able to duplicate that ground actually, rather than going down, but like using some other kind of ground plane on the second level, and maybe not wanting to issues with lighting what's below. But yeah, but I could see this kind of you doubling or tripling this, as John had said.
Sweet.
Of course, it's too close to the spaceport. They're not even close enough. So I don't see the innovation there. Spaceport has a half axis.
I see.
So that's why their wall is actually dense, because they always.
Yeah.
So there's some tricks how you can have this positive, negative, or overcome more this kind of more mathematical grip. It's also, it gets interesting when you get more into larger scales or more into urban.
Yeah.
To know how free you can be in this kind of scope of the studio, which should actually more speak about urban. It's not the Ready Player One section, and for sure not the interior. Not like this is that you just like this kind of cellular. So you render actually the potential of the project as a cellular building. So this I see more problematic, but it gets interesting when you actually align it with the grid of a car or the parking space. Because that is when you have self-driving cars, You get rid of all the parking spaces. And also get rid of the cars, so the cars will not be any more cars, but more like moving spaces, or moving rooms. So in USMI, you have this like sketchy that you need to align over one proportion. And then you have this one kind of area, where they like, it looks like a whole parking lot, or instead of parking cars, it's parking rooms. There's something, or this is like actually the most, just next to the tennis court, kind of this one drawing. Yeah, this is one, like that you begin with, okay, this is what you can for sure, if it would be in our master studio, right, or advanced studio, that I would push you in this direction. But then you have this drawing when it's on a larger side. Where you get more bored in a way, yeah, this here. And I wonder why not show them, I understand that this plan here easily is a section of this project.
Okay.
Or there.
Yeah.
And it would be the same kind of elevation, same kind of section.
Yeah.
Would be the same if we have a different scale.
Yeah, like if you took like maybe 1/8 or 1/10 of this and actually drew it at the level of detail, that would be quite nice to see. And maybe call it section. It looks like you had enough time.
On the first slide, you talk about the first slide, the impression that, hey, you want to do against something in the housing crisis, so some collage. I mean, like this kind of like tiny home, whatever, maze of very compressed places, but have now this works also with the voids and so on. This for sure is very much addresses that. So this already knows that this comes back.
Yeah, when you pick your site, you pick an empty green land. It'll be interesting if you pick a parking lot, because that's the best way to say, doing something more interesting in parking.
Yeah, that was the route that I was going for until mid-review, then I changed.
Why stop there? I mean, it's like, I'm just seeing this thing in a kind of strip that's about this, I'm thinking it, there's a strip that's about that wide. So there's like a central core, and then these things have connection to the outside. But this could be something that's, it's like 6 stories tall, and it could be elevated, and it could just go all the way across the city. It's like, why have a single family house when you have this like urban strip of housing, thousands of people? Just think.
Okay.
It could be. Yeah, I mean, we can't build horrible housing in Boston fast enough, apparently, so. Ribbon strip of like endless thing for all those people to live in.
But when you go into East Boston, or more lower to between the river and the 7th Street, it's like really getting very dense.
Yeah.
It's already like there's so many split condos, so now like the plots are so much subdivided. It feels like one continuous building. And why not really fill it up completely that you have a continuous building? So this is not so unrealistic actually as a proposal in Austin's context. Maybe a bit more trees, but.
I mean, if you did it right, if you're smart about it, it's perforated enough, there's enough like really humane housing that's inside it to get the dynamic of circulation and the correct number of people sharing space. And you lift it up in the air so it doesn't like, shadow too much stuff. It's potentially really interesting and viable.
I think you have very interesting ways of representing your project, like the Tetris thing, bringing in sort of new media into describing it. It's probably the most successful for kind of framing your project, like this whole Tetris thing. And you're using animation, if you're using software, you might as well use the software to sort of help you produce your narration, which you did. I think all the projects lend themselves to that kind of way of working. I think one thing that'll be interesting at this scale using media, right? So I imagine this thing being 3D printed without any windows, just like the solids, and then trying to point resin or some sort of like thing that melts begins to make a solid of all the voids, right? So then you now cast the voids. Right, imagine seeing that as then you like, this is a speculative project, I'll leave it in that kind of space. Just by reading the solid of the voids, you can begin to sort of infer the walkability of the thing without so much actually drawing. It's quite interesting.
That's a good way to think about it.
I hate to end this big conversation, but we're going to move on.
Thank you. What? You gotta know all this stuff. You're very hungry. Yeah. You know who?
Yeah. He's taking pictures of my
I did it for you.
She was a believer. Yeah, I'm one of them.
What happened?
No, I'm like 1.5 years. I'm the remaining one in the world. No, they don't make them anymore. No, but it's like something about it, just like it doesn't work like yeah.
I know one like that I really like, I can't find it anywhere else.
Orange, should I bring drawings?
But I've had other Berlin boots and they're just, oh my foot, so it's something about.
Really put them in, you can see how to, like, your leg, your back.
Yeah, I know, well, yeah, but speed or issues, but yeah, you know,
That's what I plan to do. Wear the shoes for so long, and if there's this quality, you'll have so long to see you have them on the yeah. You know what, no.
Sure. I'm just like stuck in. Unless you can take Aaron, how do I access my file, or do you have it?
Should be on there. Yeah, pre-upload it right It's just giant.
That's great. It's not
Okay. Hello, my name is Aleda, and this is my project. So starting the semester, my group did an analysis on this part of 7th Street for program diversity. And based on this analysis, or like the conclusions that we came up with, I felt that this section right here, this is missing. I chose that site based on the relation to the program around it, as well as the university that's right across from it. So I felt that I could have created a project that could appeal to a student demographic or single people. Yeah. And then here are some views from 7th Street, looking at the site. I have 2 sites and then there's an alleyway that's in between them, or that connects them. So that's 7th Street, and then from 6th Street, looking at the site as well. And they're both under construction right now, so they were open and available. So
Obviously.
So, starting off with our Unity studies, I began with this idea of cores and kind of trying to find some relationship between these cores and also, so I guess vertical and horizontal cores, and then trying to kind of relate the two in terms of what they could do spatially for a dense residential. And then these are some of like some spatial studies that we were asked to create that kind of derived from the Unity studies and like the shifting in these cores. Yeah, and then like towards the end is kind of an aggregation that I kind of went based off of, trying to also keep in mind a sort of bridging element between the two sites at some point. And then here is larger context and kind of the building footprint that I created in relation to everything else. And then here's the ground floor. And so starting off, and this right here is a coffee shop. So at the two ends, there's commercial spaces, a coffee shop and a laundromat. And then my intention was to have this be at the base of 7th Street and over there 6th Street as well, and kind of create courtyards as like transition spaces into the residencies. And then looking at the second floor, both commercial spaces are 2 stories. And then you start to see sort of like the circulation that I try to have be related to those spaces, as well as the residencies that start to come up towards the center by the alleyway. And then in the center, there's a bridging element that I will explain further. And then here's the 4th and 5th floor. And as you see, as you get taller, it's less dense. And it's more of like a sloping that I tried to create, also trying to take into consideration the context and not going too tall. There's there's an apartment complex behind this site that is about 5 stories, so I just tried to stay within that limit. And then here's a section of kind of the short side. And here I just kind of tried to show some of the alignments that I was trying to keep in mind, and only trying to do about 5 to 10 foot shifts from side to side to try and start to create these pathways between the units and green spaces that would connect units, in order to have private as well as shared green spaces, as well as some of the thicknesses that I started to consider as well for the growth of this type of vegetation. And then to the sides are 2 of the cores that I will explain now. Or not now. This is a section perspective. So this kind of just shows the sloping of it. This being 7th Street, that's 6th Street, and then the alleyway and the center. And then here's kind of the axonometric of the building on the site. So here's a diagram that I created to try and start to show the blue tubes. Those are the cores, which are the circulation. And then the red in the center is the bridging element that connects both sides at the 2nd story. And then here are some renders of what I kind of thought these spaces would kind of start to look like. So the circulation flow on the bridge. And then these are my two different types of units that I created. Both of them are 1 bedroom. And the smallest one, 385 square feet, the other one being 495. And I also tried to explode like kind of the roof assembly or the green roof, showing that the consideration for the soil thickness and the green space. And those are kind of the spaces that I tried to accommodate in each of the units. And then here are just some rendered, sorry for the rendered density rendered perspectives. And then here's another one that's kind of like the in between.
They're fine, yeah.
I'm taking pictures of them.
This one's just kind of trying to show that those pathways that I created with the ships to the sides, and the courtyard space down below. And then here's kind of like inside a unit, looking out at a higher elevation. That concludes my presentation.
Contact relations on a presentation, it's very carefully drafted, like you present the view very, very well.
Thank you.
Like each drawing is like, I like the drawings where you communicate actually intellectually, like content. For example, the side plan, you wrote first to show sidewalks and so on, but I like a lot the continuous hedge of concrete surface. You see actually how massive actually the amount or percentage of paved surface is overall is. Which already, not like you already prepare the motive that, hey, why I want actually so much greener on the side, or with the building. So like this to perceive that, that's I think this is really great to see that how you speak through the drawing actually using support for your concept. And one critique I have, I think basically the density should be much higher for that side. The density, it can be easily can be taller, the building, but also I think now one bit like design mistake what you do that you work actually with containers.
Yeah.
So you could more have now actually over the kind of massing or the porosity, use actually to combine actually those spaces, and the best you would automatically also get more floor because you would read them more continuous. So there would be some easy ways actually to in a way of increase the overall concept.
Yes.
It's like Khan's project, but a bit more depth. It shows the possibility of Khan's first project, like doubling it or maybe even tripling it. But yeah, it could be more dense. Yeah, it could be more dense. Like in reality, the developer wanted more dense, and then have to contend with your aggregation procedures because then you want some units. But overall, at the scaling, it's cool. You have a developer telling we're talking to crap down your neck. You've done a really good job. Right? It feels right. It feels like it works. Even your representation is great. This is how you do realistic rendering solves. I mean, at your level, this is where you should be. I mean, the texture map looks right, feels right. So if you're going to use it well. You've done that, and it's good to actually. So your parents can do it. It's possible to do it and do it well. But don't do it if it's not going to be good.
Maybe using colors symbolically, like grass is green, sky is blue, water is blue, then that's not a good way to do it. It's supposed to be much more subtle than the
I mean, she's even detailed the window for the jabs. Like at that level of detail, then it's so well done. Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of, anyway, maybe let's kind of move back to maybe your plans. Which are actually well drawn. You can show the first floor plan.
There's a trick to designing these small little plans well, and you should just study this a lot and measure real spaces. It's possible as compelling as this image is, if you were living there, you might feel like it was a little hard to turn around. It's like there's just not quite enough, because you can't make the bed because it's against the wall. There's a couple little things. It's actually, there's a real art to the whole little tiny, 6 inches here and there to make the spaces start to feel like instead of being divided by things, to 2 different rooms share the same space and somehow, in some way. It's something to pay attention to. The one person doing multifamily housing that understands it the best is Stanley Seidowitz. He does housing in San Francisco. And if you go to his website, they're all laid out there, and it's the kind of thing where anything that's small and dense gets stacked together. So bathrooms, closets, the kitchen is an inset strip, and then anything that's open is allowed to be next to other open things, so that spatially it feels very, very generous and continuous. It's very spare. It makes the plans don't look like anything, but if you've been in one of the spaces, you go like, oh wow, it just feels enormous, even when it's not, which is part of the trick. It's beautiful images. Be careful that that's not deceiving you, because you got that beautiful slatted wall is actually taking what space there is and dividing it.
I think that was part of my difficulty or challenge that I had, was working with such a narrow site and trying to create units that would kind of follow that flow, like that lateral flow, I guess.
How many unit types do you have?
2, but both of them, I guess they vary sometimes in the opening, or they're like mirrored, but it's generally 2.
The 2 is the mistake, like, just combine the walls with some inner walls.
I think that was a missed opportunity.
But also, this image is very successful because I don't see the facade from the model. Or here you break actually the cube or the cell, or the corners. When I look to the plan as an indicator of where to densify, of course you keep the bathrooms more or less like completely closed. So the next step would actually, of course, be that there's like where I would densify or put there something, so the number of mass and so on. Or where would these units in a way dividends, but also how would more in an extreme way articulate the facades that's it's too much looking like a concrete prefab construction, or too much like
a little bit,
So I think this can be also that rendering. It seems not to fit, or like it seems to be already much further than
this was earlier.
Can you show the ground plans, the first floor plans? So I got to compliment you for actually thinking about the edges of your project. That's.
There's one thing that you're missing here, it's an elevator, right?
Yes, I did not.
Something to that under corner upstairs.
Yeah, that's true. We didn't talk much about elevators, but
I mean, you need them.
It's okay, they just don't get bathrooms.
You could be a bit more, you could be more playful with the landscape, some opportunity for you to break away. And this is the same comment for the first person, how we let us the squares are. The landscape doesn't have to be like that, But I like how you showed different kinds like paving and the representation of what is green. It feels quite pleasant.
It looks like you're always going linear like this, maybe one rotated, like this rotation can give you a little bit more opportunity, because it looks like you're just doing this. And like what Daniel said, reading to the drawings, this 2 stack becomes 1, like that's a new unit type. Just merges together. Like those become opportunity, because if not, it just becomes a container.
Probably, real quick, you probably want to flip that unit on 7th, so your bedroom facing 7th Street. You have your living room facing 7th Street instead.
I think there's beds in the ground level, it's
I think I would just make out a public space.
Well, I'm sorry, I missed the first part of the presentation, but when I walked in and what I saw in the presentation, I think this is one of the places where your multiplication of the units and playing with the system, you have really tested it and made it in a space that's occupiable, that is pleasant, And you thought about not just the interior of the space, but also the exterior. And you also thought about how it means the context. So I think you did a really great job for that, and I applaud you for that. The only thing that caught my eye that I would have sort of washed out some of the colors in the axons of the models.
Okay,
It's just a lot of brown and a lot of green.
yes.
Tone it down, like the interior, the last interior that you had, you gave us some hint of what it's like, but you were not really hitting us on the nail, like it's made out of dark brown or this or that. So just sort of a slight abstraction, wash of the color.
Okay.
Because it just looks like it's too kitschy in a way.
Yeah.
There's something else you've almost done that's worth paying attention to, because I'm just looking at the puzzle thing. And thank you for this, the plan beautifully drawn. I can tell where everything is. That's a nice piece of outdoor space. These are pretty small outdoor spaces you can't do very much with.
Yes.
But if you took this piece and slid it down to here, so that this aligned, you have a niche to enter the one unit here, a niche to enter the unit there, and now you have a piece of green space that's much larger. It's similar to what you're doing with that piece over there. It's just a way in terms of adjusting the plan so that you maximize the volume and size of the spaces wherever you possibly can.
Why not adding a glass facade?
I'm sorry?
I mean, I would have the glass facade.
Oh, glass facade?
The glass and then you have the interior.
Oh, connecting the unit. Yeah.
So it's important once you get this model, like, think about what else you could do.
Yeah.
Is that picture design?
Yeah. Very nice.
Okay, let's show the accent of
The accent.
the whole project. Another one. I mean, you have the three of the white and the white. Yeah, this one. I mean, I think you can, like, a lot of things are done so well in your project that now you could say maybe I could kind of play a lot more with sort of aesthetics of the whole composition, right? And maybe how you treat the fenestrations.
Yeah.
It feels too punched in. I mean, it could be more elegant just generally.
Yeah.
And this is, if there were the next step, I think you should probably, sometimes you have to move on and don't go back, but next time you're working on a project and you've come a long way and things feels right and it feels good, and you could really actually obsess over like it's pure, think about things pure in aesthetic terms. I think your project will really gain from that. So it could be more beautiful, I think. And I think it has to do with the way the windows are and the scale of the openings and the relationship with the kind of proportions with its box.
I think
Box
also
in the
it's
interior,
like
but in the exterior.
the thicknesses
weird.
of the floors and ceilings that I had to do, because I do have some like floor to ceiling windows, but the thicknesses I feel like are kind of what.
Because there's a soil package.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. There's also, like, it looks European from the proportions, because of the isolation. Here we would have, say, when you're taking the soil, but in your view you have these kind of 40-50 centimeters of wall thicknesses.
Yeah.
And of course, you get similar proportion of windows, so you don't want to have small windows at all.
Yeah, I hate small windows.
Anyhow.
Yeah, even in restaurants, it's like square, square thing.
You don't like Alvarez and stuff.
Put fans.
Yeah.
Thank you. Put your chart here. That's right there. Just wait for it. First control.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth, and this is my project. So I started off by analyzing my site, and based on the data that we gathered, we found out that most of the residential spaces and housing were up north, and the more commercial spaces were along 7th Street. And so we also have a giant piece of the park up north too. So I thought that was really important. So I chose my site based on that. I wanted residents to have both nature side and like a city life as well at the same time. So based on that, my site is located just below Palm Creek. This is my president. So I chose this president because I found it interesting how it used angles in an interesting way while still having a curve exception. And so I started off with my Unity model and tried to like start connecting kind of like units and figuring out how to attach the apartments. These are my unit plans for 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and 3 bedroom. And this is my first floor plan. As you can see, the bottom floor is mostly, I wanted them to use it as a public space for the residents, so they could be have like a coffee shop or like a gym, where they can both gather there. And so we start seeing like this hierarchy of units. And as you go up a level, you can see like the movement of the units going upwards. And you can also see like that middle space that's empty. But as you start going up, it starts getting closer. And so in this section, you can kind of see that hierarchy better, and how there's like and both sides, there's like this like tunnel or cave-like inlet, which creates access to the park from the street side. So as you go in from, as you can see here better, from the street side, there's, you go here, there's that walkway, but you can also cross from downwards and go into the cave and into the other one going into.
What's the why behind, I didn't quite understand from your plan, all the boys behind the plan? Go back to,
See the plan?
go back to the plan. Yeah,
Yeah.
what is all that between the stair and all of the space? What is that, this? What's all this?
Like this?
Yeah, all this here, what is this?
This is,
Inside, outside, it shows.
no, it's inside, yeah.
But what is it?
It's just public space that I
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it's huge. Well, continue presenting and talk about it.
and so here are the like the internal shots. And you can see more of the space and inside the unit.
Open space.
And you can also see like the circulation coming in.
Okay.
And here's like a more shot of it with like the other buildings in it. And yeah, that's about it.
The cave, is that the cave?
Yeah.
Don't call it a cave. Find a nicer way of talking about it. I when I saw the model, I was like, oh, that's cool. Like you can see the kind of diagonal between. I don't know. I wouldn't make a thing of it. But I don't think you need all the holding space. And it's like, you know, you can get a lot of sunlight and all that. I think this is have done away with it. I think this is nice. I don't know how structurally it's going to work, but this is nice. I think this should, your model is like your project, not. I mean, that's your project too. Just get rid of the topics, you know, or keep it open, or
Yeah,
just
at
redesign it
first
somehow.
it was open, but it was just like structurally, like, I guess it was just easier to like.
Yeah, you just
visualize
become
it.
calm.
Yeah. There's got to be a way to do it. Maybe you build a frame that is really robust, and then you put the things inside. But I think you didn't. I don't think you need it. Yeah, especially if you have this lovely spaces outside. I'm not gonna go back and go into that big room. Like, there's not. Yeah.
No, it's weird, but there's a building in Copenhagen called Mountain House it's one of the big projects, BID, that's like this. It is weird. It's a really weird building. And this is all parking. They filled it up with parking, which is like, okay,
Yeah.
it's kind of a weird space. But it's this gigantic tier, and every one of the units stagger, and each unit gets the rooftop of the neighbor below. It's actually really smart. The circulation is bizarre. I mean, if they have an elevator that goes up on a slope, and there's a couple of pods that come up so that you can multiple pods, and you have to walk up around the outside to be able to get to the units. So that part's weird, but the configuration of units is actually very much like this very interesting project.
Maybe number of precedents, because you said Rossi, the Gandita Basel project, not from Rossi, but Amino next one. It's also typically when you make a terrace housing, it's not like there's a lot of project realized 60s, 70s. You need A-frame, no? Like you have to come down here with columns. So then you get like, this is a half open interior closed. There's a one like, it looks like so actually. See, like what this is from Amino.
Yeah.
And what's interesting there is when you go there, well, like it's in Italy, it's also same kind of little comparable climate to Austin. Also super hot. So you have a shaded place, and then it's actually this hard surfaces, which is super good actually for playing. Or you see actually, when we went there with the studio, like kids were playing soccer there. So it's actually quite useful. So it could also be, now I first thought, that's really a weird idea. Like, but actually, the longer you have it, actually, like for this window, when it says here, like air-conditioned space, it's like, because anyhow, you come there practically with a structure down, so why not like put that surface and maybe condition that? But then, yeah.
You have two radically different orientations, because one faces south, one faces north. I'm not sure which one's better, but that I think is worth a little more examination.
The model shows that there's also a step in this direction, right?
She didn't build the enclosed part.
Good thing.
Better this way.
Yeah, better this way, for
Yeah.
sure, because that was my first comment, you went cut and cut, it's all on the inside, you know, even this space is like, why this doesn't have aperture or something like that, why is it cut?
And the connector shouldn't be this mean little 3-foot light strip. It should be something that's allowed to get wide in some places and be a great floor plan. Yeah, this is I mean, definition mean by both definitions. One, it's mean is in just too small. It's also like not, it doesn't celebrate. Whereas, you know, if it just came across here, you got a space where people could share things, and there's an opportunity for it to be like, yeah, let's meet for some cards or something. And sometimes it's just a connector. So it's something there's some variety of how that could be done.
And you can have outdoor circulation, doesn't need to be ventilated, so you can literally do this.
It was actually like the Möbler project, so you have actually like gardens there. So, did you rent the trees inside, like in this open areas? No. A bit like smaller. But not really, no? That would be more luxurious. You know, you get actually a negative house. But coordinate is always when you step units, no?
The question is, this path existing, or is your design the center?
Yeah.
It's your design or is existing that you're keeping?
Wait, can you repeat that?
The path, is that, do you design that?
Oh, yeah,
okay.
yeah.
This thing looks like a working structure. I mean, I was using glue instead of hold downs or stuff. But you know, sometimes you're doing stuff and like this doesn't make sense. It's way, you kind of have to have a critical eye on this project and have ways of like self-evaluation. And if you did the model like this, I would have just stopped and just done the drawing this way, to not have shown that aspect. And one thing that is, this whole thing feels nice. I think this is much nicer than that, but I don't mind that. I mean, it's kind of quite radical. I like to see it house and
You just have a stair that comes down and a couple of columns.
Yeah, you could do that too. These spaces might not be as nice just because they're a bit dark. So there, maybe you could invert the V's, right? So there could be ways. I think within the constraints of the units, I think there are ways where how you could sort of deal with that. Maybe you could pair two together, or maybe you begin instead of doing an on-off thing.
Yeah.
But, then you can maybe you have 2, 3 together, much more large open spaces, and then you begin to lose this repetition of spaces that might be unused.
Two things. I would let go of the pie shape for the unit. Like you don't absolutely have to have that. There needs to be a little bit of flexibility with that. And wherever there's green space, I think that would happen on top of the unit, just because it will require more depth, or happens where there's not a unit, one way or the other. Because its performative requirement is different than the other conditions. So, and that also will, again, break down this relentless wedge that the unit's in. So you step outside and you have this garden out here, and this other part's deck. And it'll start to change it, add a little level of richness that's in there. And I think the spaces in between could sometimes be the bedrooms, instead of going this way, might turn the other way.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're perforated so that breeze can go through there. So I think it's nice to move past that singular module. But if you like the puzzle aspect, go try and figure out a mountain house in Copenhagen. It's
It's hard to figure out.
Very difficult to figure out. But the premise is so similar to yours. It's like every unit has a generous connection outdoors and a beautiful view over the common area and the garden that's on top of your neighbor's unit. And to do that, they have to go jump all kinds of weird make machines that do strange stuff.
Yeah, I mean, like more intellectually, like all this kind of terrace housing. Well, actually, Portugal is did in the 60s, they were looking if they were using the infrastructure to produce actually public space. It was always like we had like very extensive kind of navigation space. Actually, which is today you would probably avoid. Like the Mountain Project, for example, has zero public. So, and that's again, yours interesting, but I think also like this, the middle is kind of lines with unmotivated. But this must be a more connected order. I mean, you have the probability of this opening gate or something. So you need some other kind of movements of that. But there's a whole history, like how we use actually the infrastructure project to produce more additional to the housing, you know? Especially with the terrace projects, is what the intention of it actually.
Yeah, something infrastructural about it.
Yes.
Like I'm wondering what it could anchor to, where it makes maybe, did you don't mind having like this kind of slightly darker areas? It feels like one project that you can make really long. I don't know, what's that one in England, in London? And you could squiggle. It's just like this interior is so nice. And I know you haven't really shown it, and like it'd be nice if you like made the landscape maybe actually designed it a bit more. But this is really nice. This whole area here, and I think your project is about this aspect. No, but then you have to see how you kind of resolve this. But I can imagine this thing being like snaking, maybe a talk. If you just really long, very speculative thing. Yeah.
The model's doing a lot of things that it's better.
Having hold it the whole time.
Also, you're not facing them together, like there's this void happening here too. It's very interesting. It's not like parallel lines like in the neighborhood. It's nice that shift, we're shifting these two things. So I think your guts are right in the model more than decision.
Yeah.
So you also think about sun, the light, the wind, and sun, and how we relate to that. I would also look at the exact openings, both on one side versus the other. So they're just kind of punctured holes, or somewhere do you have a plane and then a vertical lookout? So makes it more specific to what's going on inside to figure out what is out there, because these are all sort of stamped out in a similar way. I would also have you think about the terrace. Is it all grass? Because it looks just like the grass on the ground. Or is there the paver somewhere? Is there a pattern? And that would go, the pattern can also help you inform your openings. Because I think your openings they're just punched holes. So for a compositional way of looking out, and then what does the composition of all of the windows look like? The elevations are really hard because each of the rooms asks for some kind of opening relationship to the outside, and then you're asked to the outside and make a composition of all of this. So just for a fine tuning the parts that you have. And I would leave it open like that. Maybe you just have some Rossi deep or with the housing in France. I cannot, it leaves my mind is not working, but it's got a series of very thin columns that are like trees and they almost disappear. So we can do anything we want with the structure, it just depends on how much you want to pay for it.
Yeah.
Anything is really possible, but think about it, how it actually works through the whole system. I actually even like the back of the units, very much so.
That's good.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
I'd let it go, huh?
Yeah, I do too.
No, I just think it's really, but then again, look at it and see, is this side different than the one facing inside? And are the openings responding the same way? The problem that you have with this is that you have them sort of almost symmetrically facing. So then if you're designing the one of the serpentine, then you can think about it in more perceptible direction. But then we take a mirror image and do something else here, and then not both, they cannot have the same criteria of when you get into light in. And I think it's a really playful and exciting scheme. I really enjoy the sort of the stacking of it. And then I would also figure out how do I actually have a break, or some of them come up higher and just become terraces, because it's kind of cut out flat with the ground. So maybe take a look at a really old architect like Jose Luis Sir in Cambridge. His rooftops are always so animated. How the building needs to start.
What?
Do what?
I wonder if you could make the diagonal like shift on the same linear thing. Say if you have this sort of V thing, how you could, if you were to elongate it, then you have, I think you begin to break the symmetry somehow. Maybe you apply different ways of how the way the sort of angles are like bending.
You've got all the beautiful parts, it's just how you're going to strategically let them talk to each other. And it's like, good job.
Yeah.
It's getting late.
That's cool.
The three color, that's like, I don't know much. Okay.
We got a little bit late start.
That's
Yeah. Second half.
Is that your real name?
Xiomara?
Yeah, so nice.
Thank you.
Oh, Lennon, that's okay.
She
Next
didn't do
slide.
it. Except you changed her name.
Okay, next slide.
Is it Portuguese? Is that pronounced in Portuguese?
I don't know. I don't know where it originates from, but I'm Salvadorian, Central American.
Could have been Brazilian, but I.
Wait, so it's a
Yeah, I've heard it in Brazilian, like as a Brazilian name before.
Ever met anyone that named is sort of actually before? Say it.
Okay.
Okay, we're ready.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Xiomara Andrade, And this is my final presentation for urban ecologies. So first off, I would just want to start off with the like the reasoning behind picking a site and the kind of project that I wanted to create. Just like before, we've been talking about the the programmatic density of 7th Street. My transect of 7th Street was the one right alongside I-35, and then this is 7th Street. So it was really interesting. Most of the other transects, the north side is a lot more residential, and this one still is, but there is a mix of other businesses around the north side just because it's so close to the highway. So it's a really interesting site to play around with. I ended up choosing this particular spot, and it's not too close to, it's not really on I-35, but it's close enough where it's still easy access. And then it's just around a lot of businesses that I wanted to have the residents of the place that I was going to create interact with a lot more, because I didn't want to build something that would take away from those businesses. And I also wanted to incorporate different socioeconomic backgrounds to be able to live in the same kind of space. And this is the process of how it began with a case study. That's like a model of like one of the floor plans, and it was very interesting to kind of play around with. I created this base of that floor plan and just kind of copying and pasting it and rotating it, and from this I was able to create this kind of shared space in between, which gave me that initial idea of creating spaces that were shared, but people could still have their own personal rooms from a variety of people that could live in the space. So I could create more private spaces, more private units that are completely to themselves, or some that will share like a kitchen or something like that, or maybe an outdoor space. And that would allow for it to be cheaper than the other places. And then the Unity model on the far end, on the top, was created from different plates and stacking them together and just kind of seeing how that, the pushing and pulling of those plates. And from those plates, I created my own floor plans derived from the initial one of these like just angled, very angled walls, but it became a little too much once you started putting them together. It was really hard to connect them together and make them make sense because they were a little too random. So from that, I started back to square one and just playing with rectangles, and then running those rectangles together to make new floor plans that would make better sense when joining them together. And these are the floor plans the 3 floor plans that I have in my unit. Except this part in the inside is no longer how it looks like, but that was just the initial concept. And then that is the most private space. It's a 1-bedroom. They're all open floor plans. That's like the bigger one. These are all more studios, and then we share a common balcony, and then we share a common kitchen. And then initially, I stacked them up together to create some sort of wall barrier, but that was too closed off, and that was not the point of what I wanted to create. I wanted to create something that was inviting and something that made people want to explore more around the site and the surrounding businesses. And so then, after mid-review, I developed this other one right here that was two of these curve shapes made of these same units, but it was still too random and too chaotic because the shape in and of itself is already like it's already random enough. It didn't need to be too random when it's stacking them up together. So I started to create a rule for them, and basically they would just be getting pushed back more and more, and that created this building. And this is the floor plan, the first floor, and here you can see those same units. And it was just like shifting them to create that curve, so it's not too messy and I could create pathways.
But the curve, where's the curve?
But just like the shape that he created together. And then I made gaps in between just for access points to the streets. And then in order to bring people into these places, I placed like kiosks, kind of like for something quick to eat, like some coffee or a quick coffee or something like that, just to bring people into the space and then just make them want to travel around and go through and see what's more out there. And then for these access points, there's the more private ones, so they're smaller as well. And it's where the circulation when they go on top. And this is the next stacking of the plates, and they're just shifted 10 feet back. And then that allowed me to play around with the balcony spaces, so they started to create their own green spaces with their own kind of view, and it wasn't too repeated, so it was still unique in its own way. And then there was it felt too disconnected. It felt like just two different curves that just like didn't really connect with each other or speak to each other. So I thought of a bridging element that worked out better for circulation purposes as well, so people could get to one place to another faster. And on the third floor, there's another bridge, and these are the units on this side, but on the other side, there are no more units, but it's an entire rooftop area that after playing around with how I wanted to create green spaces in that area, created basically a track all around. So it's just something that was kind of just organically formed from the way I created the green spaces. And then this area is more for like any kind of events that they want to create, any barbecues or a place like different benches and stuff, just for seating and lounging more in those spaces. And then as you go up, you see the change in color is just change in level for the green spaces. And this is my site plan. And in this site plan, I included different businesses that are around the area, which are one of the main driving factors of this project, because I wanted people to be able to get through it and be able to experience different places. So it's some people to be here, some people to be there, some people to be down here. So we were able to create that effect easily with the openings that were created. And then this is just kind of like what you would experience on the inside of the bigger unit. And it's a very big open space, it feels like, although it's just, I believe, like 500 or 600 square feet. And then this is from the rooftop, how it would be experienced by everybody at the same time, and how you could see the bridging moments over there on the far end, kind of interacting with each other and speaking to each other. And then this is just a shot from one of the unit's balconies. You could see it through the inside, and it's just a nice moment to experience as well. And then here are like those shops that I created to attract people inside and experience the inside, not just like for the residents, but for other people as well. And it kind of just like wanted to create some sort of park environment that was inviting. And in the sectional model, or in the section cut, those cut the short side, so it was cut like right here to show how the bridges are interacting with each other and how the units, you can see they pretty much like repeat back, so it just kind of gives that modular effect to it for cost effectiveness, but still creating unique spaces for people. Such as you see, there's no balconies in this area, but over there, with that pushback, there were balconies created, and there is enough like social space.
Here or?
Oh, it's just like, so like right here on this floor, there is no balcony, but over there, you can see that there was a balcony that was created from that pushback. And then, you see,
Go to the middle four, the plan, just for a second. Yeah, okay, so here I was looking at, I'd like for you to tell us a little bit about this idea of hinge between the two pieces. It seems like you have the two living or sleeping spaces that open, and there's a hinge in between, and some of the hinges are rooms, some of the hinges is passing through, some are voids. Can you tell us a little bit about what was that important?
Like movie space in there?
Yeah, like this here. So these sort of join, I wanna know what this is. Here, it's a bridge. There, it's a space, so you have these two things. And so what happens in your mind? What is the importance of the thing in between? It's almost like a hinge.
Yes,
So sometimes it's solid, sometimes I'm just not quite clear what the dimensions about the hinge are.
yeah, so this is one unit and this is another unit, and because of creating different, like pricing ranges with people, some units will share the balcony space, so this is the green space of that balcony, and then this unit.
And what's that over there? What is
This
that?
part is just like the decking, so it's not all grass.
Next to them, next to the next.
And then this room was created, just because there is a gap in between when we keep building up, and it was, I created this one and that one, this one and this one, and these are for like the amenities. It would be like, if they wanted a studio space there, or, they wanted a gym space, that's.
What is, this one is not.
That's the biggest
Yeah, but
one.
it is like, what is it?
Yeah, so that would be
Is this room
like
here, is that room there?
the living room space, the kitchen at the bottom, laundry room. It's just not modeled.
I think you need to be systematic about what happens when you handle this and what are the opportunities you are filling in. Is it the space that both units share? Is it open, is it closed? In the Stephen Hall project, in the Fukuyama housing project, he's using the idea of the hinge and how it's quite interesting because the site plan is a metaphor of the hinge. This plan is a hinge, but it's the space that's in between. So I just think it would be good if you can clearly, in your mind, define what those spaces are, because what this really does for you, it creates a series of plans that when shifted, gives you the richness of going out of the terrace and one end, so it gives you, and that's what's working well in that model. But I think you need to be more intentional about what actually happens between those, whenever the split happens. When you get a thing to avoid or body of the butterfly or whatever metaphor you want to do, to think about the things when you do, when the walls start being parallel and at the end, what is the intention of that? I think you're almost there, but I think I would be really clear in your mind of what they are, and then be consistent with it. And I think what they then do, they give you wonderful opportunities when you stack them, and you start to shift them back, the kind of spaces that create in between.
We are surprised in this project that everything is irregular, but then every apartment is actually the same. And here this hinge actually, the scale of 20, I mean the hinges also the corner, I mean, it has the same size as what you offer as an apartment in the first place. So if you occupy this area, or we like own this now, and then the exploration really, this should be part of a floor plan. And now you hint already to this that you say, hey, it should actually not exclusively living. It should be also some kind of home office maybe, and that's like a different kind of like, not like a standard apartment, which is great, it's also not a standard form. And I think you could do, you should actually use that. Thinking further, what would it mean actually today now? Same as you offer more green space for apartment, like what now when I make an additional program, what it can actually be. And so this actually a project starts. On the urban side, one comment, you talk a bit about the I-85, and that's one for your side or how you develop the side. This I don't see yet because it's like just irregular or actually quite symmetrical and its irregularity. And it looks now also when you have the inner courtyard with from the inside to the outside develop actually between like how you come to the students and where the forecourt is and so on. We're talking about the I-35, I talk mostly about noise. I mean, like, it's actually the most ridiculous, but like, nowhere else in the world, just Texas, you're allowed to build directly on such a street. Because it's super precarious, actually, to, in that condition, to allow actually housing. So this is nowhere else, actually. So I would, when you talk about that, I would assume that you, because of the noise is like very important, like how to block actually. That's no, I would now actually predict or like a very asymmetrical actually site. No, that like there's a very hard wall somewhere, something you really like this one that, and or that this porosity is like something else to do. But it's, I don't know, that's a bit like from the urban side. I miss that you further integrate this as a motivator for really using this kind of flexibility to really formulating something on the side.
Yeah, I didn't really implement that part just because I thought it was far away enough from I-35 that I didn't need to really consider it. It was just more for like the accessibility of being able to get somewhere faster, getting to target faster than being able to use a highway because it's like right nearby enough where it's not too far away. It was just for that purpose that I mentioned it, not because I implemented.
But you talked about something else in your premise. You talked about the businesses. I don't think those are important at all because they're here one day, they change.
Yeah.
I think, what are they? They're noise producing. You have a lot of people coming in and out. They don't have a sense of identity. They just change the signs, so they're going from one place to something else. So I would be careful not to use that. They're not really driving anything that you're doing in the plan. Because that was in your statement. We talked about it. Be careful with your words and what you use, because then they'll come back and say, well, why are you related to businesses out there? But can we also see the relationship of this in a site plan to see where the streets are?
Yes.
What is this a busy one? Is this, and that can begin to give you. Okay, so that's the 7th Street. So you're really opening this out toward the 7th Street. And
Seems like it should be a like a clear courtyard typology. There's something very suburban about it, which the too much green on the edge. It's like, which is fine, but this is not. This is a bit, you're trying to go dense. So think about how you encounter the edge, right? So that you have the curves happening. It's informed by, I think, you have this macro curve. So it could be nice if maybe they were bent. You're thinking about the way the bends are happening in relationship to the kind of the streets. This model is really beautiful, that part. I think you have two projects going on. One is really good. The other one is actually pretty bad. This is great. This is nice. I mean, but if you look inside, it's like, oh man, you got this long overhead plane, right? And then you have a small opening. It's going to be dark. So when you do your project, and it's not you, it's everybody. Even I think the last project we came from this. Yeah, there's no backside. Everything's like front. So if that's nice, like, oh, how am I going to make that inside nice? Like, imagine, yeah, that's your apartment there. It's like a small thought. It's like, well, you got like 12 feet of like overhead planes, and then there's another one that's projected like 3 feet. So just try to think about the sort of how this thing has like both sides to it. I mean, this works for like maybe Los Angeles and here, but imagine that, like you got a hillside thing. It's really lovely. It'd be quite nice if this were the street. It'd be kind of cool actually to have it. It happens sometimes, but it shifts back a little bit to more to some other areas of the project.
Go to the floor plan. Sorry. Okay, good. Everyone should draw the furniture in your floor plan. You have to do it. There's these projects like this will make or break depending on how well you've designed the space and how it gets used in a like 3 or 4 square foot margin. And there's a real art form to the whole puzzle about where do I put things so the spaces feel generous and they're usable and operable. And I'm okay. I'm not real good. I just have to go study somebody really good like Stanley Sidowitz. My father-in-law could do it better than anybody. He can juggle stuff around and pick up like 80 extra square feet just by reconfiguring the bathroom walls in a place. So there's a real thing to it. And when I start to think about it, there's some kind of serious questions about how the units work. I was going to one thing, which is, if I was going to build this and pay for it, I like how the massing makes these 2 modules with an in-between space. When I look at the inside, I have to build this much wall to make that space, or I could build that much wall, and I get all that extra square feet. And I have to air condition it, and if I air condition it, I've got way more surface area that way than if I just do this. So it's not unjustifiable at the moment. Now, I don't know where the furniture goes, I don't know how it lays out. I'm not sure which way the door should swing, what goes in here, how does this begin to work? There's a really nice project by Ed Architects called Carmel Place. It's like micro units. These are units that are 8 feet wide. They're like this wide, and a murky bed, and they're really tightly laid out. And it's a really good one to study. What happens in that space, right? Where's the dining table? What happens to these things? So it's a thing where you always just embrace that. It's a kind of sort of like a little puzzle to start to figure out. And if you get to watch anybody really good at it, you should do that, because you're like, wow, how did you figure out a way to, there's no hallway space, and what would have been a hallway space is now actually part of this like living space. And when I walk in, I can see outside, so it actually feels spacious, and everything conspires to make it feel bigger than it really is. So don't skip that part of that. That's actually part of the agenda of the studio. You have an obligation to start to get into that part of the project, because your project will live or die based on how well that part of the problem gets worked out in your life.
I don't mind the glass and the thing. I mean, the small opening, I think it'd be nice, having a chest, the outside, like, see how some developer frown about.
Well, it doesn't make sense. It's the nicest part of the project, but it doesn't make sense. So it's like, damn, you gotta, maybe there's a wall and it steps back a little bit, and it notches and defines the space somewhat, but you gotta really figure out how it's used.
Well, to have plans and design also like question a lot of things. Like I see a lot of angle, like why cannot be simplified? So you go there and simplify it a little bit instead of doing all of this job, because the job is just coming from an offset. That's your operation. You just offset it and quarter down. Yeah. So I agree with those comments. Like read this plan, see where you have opportunities. Like for me, it's even like maybe this line goes away. And this is part of the collection the entrance 2 years ago, the entrance to the main corridor.
Yeah.
Really getting to understanding what are my opportunities here.
Yeah, it could be a little bitty courtyard. Those 2 units share together that's separated from everybody else walking by. Well, it's better. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah.
One of the things that in shaping the rooms, when you have one single room there, how do you place service like bathrooms and something else? Is they going to be taken out of, like bite out of the apple, and you have the edge? Or are you going to try to figure out, what actually happens to the ceiling across here, whether this is sense of space? These are some really odd pieces. I'm always telling students that don't take a bite out of your apple and put it there as a human plan, because it's not thought out, it's not loved, it's not considered. So look at it, design one of those ruined family apartments, and then to see how what you learn from doing that, how they just become very similar. But it's always like, how do you place the volume within the space?
Yeah, and again, the best person to look at is Stanley Seidowitz, and he's just designs these really beautiful minimalist multifamily units in San Francisco, which is very dense. But and his plans are super legible and everything's on his website, but you know, the blue indicates all that stuff that's relatively dense. So bathroom, closet, this is a notch where the kitchen is, it's a galley kitchen, so that's a kitchen space, that's a living space. These two spaces share the same volume, so it really feels much bigger than it is, even though it has an entry, dining room, and living space all lined up next to each other. All the exterior space is allowed to be maximized so that you have a window wherever you need to have it. And the stuff that gets denser is all lumped together on the inside. But like Smitty said, it's not like, you know, you see a box and then you stick something in the corner, like, what do you say, take a bite out of the apple?
Yeah, I always.
Yeah, it's not a good, yeah.
Leave the apple.
Yeah, because it sort of makes it L-shaped, and it's a thing that's sort of like, it looks like an afterthought, and again, if you can find another way to do it, but study a lot of really good versions of how people have figured that problem out.
And it could be nice if this thing were like, and I see it's beautiful on one side how the thing stacks back, but if we're straight, I think you could solve some problems with maybe what I talked about previously, how the darkness of it's happening on the inside. And there's something quite nice that's happening, but I don't think you're taking advantage of it, and you should. And this might come with experience too. I mean, I've lived in very horrible places, and I paid a lot of money for them. So it's easier for me to think about what's a nice place to live in, right? And when you have the opportunities for these things to be a bit nicer, I'd say you can have cross ventilation here and there. You have a side door, and it seems robust enough that it's wide enough for you to feel as though you own some positive, right? Someone's walking directly next to your window, I mean, they're close, but maybe you could take in that a bit and allow that actually to feel comfortable. But yeah, that's kind of a lost edge there. It's a much more space. Even there too, there as well. It's like it's hard to you. Yeah. As when you know, maybe when you draw the things, you gotta scrutinize them. Like, what? It's like, do I want a lot of wall? Like, does it feel right if I had to leave a bed there or sorry, like a couch or something? But it could be really nice because you've created a template for it to be, but you just have to make it there, I guess.
This good that early on you realize there are a lot of random moves and you started like simplify. But I think now that you have plans, it's not the result of it. It's just now kind of continuous simplifying. So.
Yeah, it's also all projects are a combination of design from what you're doing from the outside and what the inside out. So the inside out I would take even further from the inside, not just the module. Start to see what begin to happen, and then also look at it from the outside at the same time. Some very nice things that begin to work, and then some things that I think are just, not developed yet. So look for this.
Thank you.
Well, thank you to all the guys. Really appreciate you all coming today.
Sorry, it's Friday afternoon. Had it popped out, but.